Chapter 841, Explanation. More than an hour later, as the first light of dawn began to break and the crisp sound of birdsong filled the air, Harry and Ron from Gryffindor House, Cho Chang from Ravenclaw House, and Fleur's sister Gabrielle were ushered into the Great Hall. A dark green halo lingered in the sky, signaling the world was waking up. Harry, still groggy, descended the steps of the foyer. However, the sight of the gathered crowd in the auditorium, which included the headmaster of Durmstrang, Professor Dumbledore, and Professor Atticus Blaine, jolted him awake. The fatigue that had clung to him vanished, and beside him, Ron's eyes widened as he shrank his neck in surprise. "What do you think happened?" Ron whispered, but Professor McGonagall, clearly in a foul mood, shot them a stern look that silenced the boys immediately. "I brought them, Albus, Atticus," Professor McGonagall announced as she reached the staff table. She nudged Harry and Ron forward, and judging by their expressions, they seemed to fear they were in serious trouble. "To avoid repeating myself, please wait a moment," Professor Blaine said with a smile, his tone reassuring. Professor Dumbledore, standing beside him, also smiled warmly at Harry, offering a hint of encouragement. It didn't seem like a dire situation, Harry mused. As he glanced around, Harry was surprised to spot Cho Chang. She stood in the dimly lit auditorium, leaning against a pillar with one arm crossed over the other. Her expression was a mix of confusion and fear. When she noticed Harry looking at her, she hesitated, as if wanting to approach him for comfort, but ultimately decided against it, averting her gaze. Harry pursed his lips, feeling a bit disheartened. About 10 minutes later, 3 figures emerged from the foyer. Though their faces were indistinct, Harry and Ron immediately recognized one as the headmistress of Beauxbatons. At Hogwarts, her only rival in stature was Hagrid, though Hagrid was more robust. The little girl was Gabrielle Delacour, and the middle-aged man was Ludo Bagman, the director of the Department of Magical Games and Sports at the Ministry of Magic, and a retired Quidditch star. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, sensing something significant was about to unfold. "Now that everyone is here," Atticus Blaine clapped his hands, drawing the attention of the anxious group. "Let me explain." Cho stepped away from the pillar, and Harry and Ron straightened up, while Gabrielle, nestled under Madame Maxime's protective arm, blinked sleepily, her hair slightly disheveled. "I believe you all know that today marks the second round of the Triwizard Tournament," Atticus began gently. "The task involves venturing into the Black Lake." He scanned the faces of the young ones, noting their lack of surprise. It was expected, as they were the most important people to the champions, and it was only natural they were informed beforehand. The champions must dive into the Black Lake and retrieve their most cherished treasure within an hour. You are the treasures they must find. A chill swept through the hall, and the ancient chandelier above creaked ominously, adding a touch of eeriness to the dimly lit room. The realization dawned on the group, and Ron's eyes widened in fear. "Rest assured, you need not worry about your safety underwater," Atticus continued. "Professor Dumbledore and I will ensure your well-being. Are there any questions?" A tense silence filled the room, and those who had been called were still in shock. The youngest, Gabrielle, clung to Madame Maxime's hand, her frail body trembling slightly. Noticing this, Madame Maxime felt a pang of guilt and crouched down to comfort Gabrielle softly. Ron, his voice high-pitched with anxiety, asked Atticus Blaine, "After an hour, all hope will be gone?" "Oh, don't worry, Mr. Weasley," Atticus replied with a reassuring smile. "I only said that to make the warriors nervous and to encourage them to face the challenge with courage. You won't suffer any misfortune." This explanation seemed to ease Ron's expression slightly, while Harry's eyes darted around the room. It was clear that Cho Chang was there because of Cedric, and Gabrielle was undoubtedly connected to Fleur. But he and Ron were both alone. Could one of them have been chosen by Krum? Harry shuddered at the thought and quickly voiced his concern. "Oh, that's not the case, Mr. Potter," Ludo Bagman interjected with a grin. "After much discussion, we concluded that the most important person to Victor is Professor Karkaroff. As for you and Mr. Weasley, you were both chosen as the most important people to Miss Granger." Silence fell once more as Harry and Ron stood there, mouths agape in confusion. For a moment, they were at a loss for words. They were the most important people to Hermione. Harry didn't see a problem with this, but did it mean Hermione needed to be part of the competition? Sensing the implications, Harry opened his mouth to ask, but Professor Blaine spoke first with a smile. I've customized a few sets of competition uniforms identical to those of the Warriors. These will provide you with some protection, just in case any accidents occur during the competition. Atticus glanced at Karkaroff, his tone apologetic. I'm sorry, Professor Karkaroff, but those uniforms were prepared for young wizards. I'm afraid we don't have the right size for you. Karkaroff's mouth twitched, but he didn't respond to Atticus's apology. Instead, he turned to Dumbledore and spoke in a low voice. When do we start, Dumbledore? If you are ready, Professor Karkaroff, Dumbledore replied with a polite bow. I can cast the spell for you now. Surviving underwater while unconscious was no simple feat, but for a great wizard like Dumbledore, it was manageable. Harry watched as Dumbledore's sleeves slipped back, revealing his wand. With a flick, Karkaroff, the headmaster of the magical school, quietly passed out and lay flat, floating in the air. A layer of bubbles enveloped him, shrinking until it merged with his pale skin. Harry was lost in thought when Professor Blaine spoke again. Everyone, please follow me. The clothes I've prepared for you are in the room. There's a dressing room there. After you change, I'll cast a spell for you. With that, Atticus led the way to a small room at the back of the auditorium. Go ahead, Potter. Weasley, Professor McGonagall, who had been stern throughout, finally urged Harry and Ron with a pursed-lipped smile. Harry wanted to discuss the situation and Hermione's precarious position with Ron, but Professor McGonagall nudged him forward, and they had to jog to catch up. As they entered the room, Harry glanced back. Cho Chang approached timidly, and Gabrielle, with Madame Maxime's encouragement, turned back 3 times before slowly entering the room. End of this chapter. Chapter 842, Loss and Panic. The small room behind the Great Hall was usually locked, but the last time Harry saw it open was the night Hermione was chosen as the Hogwarts champion. Driven by curiosity, Harry stepped inside. The fireplace directly opposite was ablaze, casting a warm glow that made the room much cozier than the chilly corridors outside. The furnishings were simple, a few sofas, a long table, and several sleeping portraits hanging on the side walls. At the far end of the room, a few narrow, grid-like changing rooms were awkwardly positioned against the wall, clearly a temporary addition. You can choose a suit that fits you, Atticus Blaine said gently, gesturing to several sets of competition sportswear piled on the table. Harry and Ron, who had entered first, exchanged glances. Professor Blaine, Harry asked urgently before Cho Chang could enter, what's going on? Does this mean Hermione has to rescue both of us? After receiving a positive reply, Ron exclaimed, This isn't fair. When selecting a rescue target for Hermione, we all agreed that both of you qualify as her most important person, a treasure, Atticus explained with a smile. However, Professor Karkaroff felt that choosing just one of you might embarrass the other and strain your friendship, so he suggested that you both participate. This explanation left Harry and Ron speechless for a moment. They exchanged looks, and Ron took a deep breath, shivering slightly. If you want to go down to the Black Lake, I'd rather stay on the shore and watch the game. Harry grinned, though the frown on his forehead remained. But that makes things more difficult for Hermione, doesn't it? You can't look at things so superficially, Harry, Atticus replied calmly. Having 2 friends in danger simultaneously might ignite her fighting spirit and strengthen her resolve. Harry and Ron hesitated, but Cho Chang entered the room, and the topic was no longer appropriate to continue. Harry walked to the table, his head bowed, and randomly picked out some clothes before heading to the dressing room at the far end. He twisted the handle, but the door wouldn't open. The door might be broken. Please use another room. Professor Blaine's voice came at the right moment. Harry shrugged and moved to the next room with his clothes. After Cho Chang also entered a dressing room with suitable clothes, Gabrielle Delacour walked in slowly. The little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes looked frightened, biting her lower lip with tears in her eyes. Yet, she didn't retreat. Instead, she clenched her small fists and stood on tiptoes to pick out clothes. Harry and Ron emerged from the dressing rooms around the same time, and by then, Gabrielle had already changed and was waiting at the table. Seeing this cute little girl about to venture into the eerie depths of the Black Lake with him, Harry felt a surge of sympathy. When Gabrielle looked at him, he offered her a friendly smile. To his surprise, Gabrielle seemed to have conquered her fear and returned his smile sweetly. Ahem! Professor Blaine cleared his throat, perhaps to ease their nerves. His voice was gentler than before. Sorry, everyone, but time is tight, and we can't afford to waste it. I assure you, there will be no pain. So, Harry? Harry muttered under his breath, his reluctance evident, but he complied and stood up. 20 minutes later, Atticus Blaine emerged with a row of young wizards floating in tow. As the crisp morning air filled the courtyard, several people waiting outside immediately approached. Madame Maxime gently brushed Gabrielle's hair aside, a hint of concern in her eyes. Are you certain everything will go smoothly, Blaine? She asked. Of course, Madame Maxime, Atticus Blaine reassured her, though he stumbled slightly over her name. I've used it before. Dumbledore, with a warm smile, interrupted Atticus's explanation. Atticus's magical skills are quite reliable, Olim, he said, addressing Madame Maxime. He then gestured to the group. Come along, everyone. We must get everything in order quickly, and perhaps we can still find time for breakfast. The anticipation of the upcoming competition had kept Hermione awake for most of the night, her mind racing with anxious thoughts. What if her magic, which she wasn't entirely confident in, failed during the competition? What if she couldn't retrieve the treasure from the vast expanse of the Black Lake within the allotted time? Moreover, the nature of the treasure remained a mystery to her. Despite her vigilance, she hadn't noticed anything missing that could be considered a treasure. Her unease lingered until reason finally urged her to rest. In the second half of the night, she drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be awakened by the first light of dawn. The morning sun streamed into the dormitory, casting a warm glow over Parvati and Lavender's beds before reaching Hermione's face. Instinctively, she sat up with a start, her long-standing habits kicking in. To her surprise, Lavender and Parvati were already up and about. Realizing she needed to wear her competition attire, Hermione quickly changed clothes. Her roommates had already freshened up and were ready to head downstairs. Good luck, Hermione, they called out. We'll be rooting for you. Grateful for their support, Hermione hurriedly thanked them and dashed into the bathroom. After a quick routine, she rushed downstairs, hoping to see Harry and Ron in the common room. During the first task, Ron had been at odds with her and Harry had been sent by Professor Blaine to greet visitors at Hogsmeade Station, leaving her to face the challenge alone. But now, with their misunderstandings resolved, she expected them to be there, ready to offer encouragement. To her disappointment, they were nowhere to be seen, leaving her feeling a bit deflated and even more exhausted from her restless night. Hey, Hermione! Neville's voice broke through her thoughts. He had spotted her from the boys' dormitory stairs and waved enthusiastically. His call drew the attention of Samus, Dean, the Weasley brothers, and others, who all turned to greet her, jogging over with smiles. Oh! George exclaimed, eyeing Hermione's dark circles with a mischievous grin. You look absolutely radiant, my brave lady. This is no time for jokes, George, Neville interjected, his usual target of the Weasley brothers, teasing. He turned to Hermione with a serious expression. We were just discussing something, Hermione. Maybe you have some insight. What is it? Hermione asked, her curiosity piqued. Witnessing Neville's transformation firsthand, Hermione couldn't shake the discomfort she felt from his serious demeanor. His words only added to her confusion. Here's what happened, Neville began, noticing Hermione's puzzled expression. Last night, around 4 o'clock, Professor McGonagall unexpectedly appeared in our dormitory. She didn't look well. Without offering any explanation, she woke Harry and Ron and took them away. Samus, Dean, and I all saw it happen, and they haven't returned since. I assumed you might know something. Professor McGonagall took Harry and Ron away? On game day? Hermione's face suddenly turned pale. End of this chapter. Chapter 843. The Game Begins. Hermione's sudden high-pitched scream nearly shattered the glass in the common room. Her friends, gathered around her, winced in pain, momentarily fearing that Hermione had once again encountered something cursed or sinister. I can't believe it, Hermione exclaimed, stomping her foot in frustration. I just realized it. Everyone in the lounge turned to look at her, but she offered no explanation. Instead, she pushed past the Weasley brothers, who blocked her path, sprinted towards the entrance, and vanished through the portrait of the fat lady. Even the most oblivious among them could sense that something was amiss. Harry, Ron, the Weasley siblings, and the Creevey brothers exchanged shocked glances before quickly following her. Though they hesitated for only a few seconds, by the time they caught up, Hermione was already descending to the 5th floor. "What's going on, Hermione?" Neville called out. Since returning from St. Mungo's, he had developed a certain leadership quality, his calm demeanor standing out among the younger wizards. He leaped down several steps at a time, reaching Hermione first. "Are Harry and Ron in trouble?" "The second task is under the Black Lake, Neville," Hermione replied, her voice breathless as she practically flew down the stairs. At such a speed she risked spraining her ankle, so she focused intently, offering only a brief explanation. The fact that the second task was beneath the Black Lake was no longer news. The competition team had been setting up a stage, and everyone had speculated about it. "But what does that have to do with Harry and Ron?" Neville, the only one able to keep pace with Hermione, asked, puzzled. "You don't understand, Neville," Hermione panted, leaping over a trick step on the spiral staircase. In a flash, the group of Gryffindor students, drawing much attention, appeared on the 2nd floor platform. The notice in the foyer had officially announced that the second task would take place in the Black Lake. The deans and prefects of each house were organizing teams under the marble stairs outside the foyer to watch the event. "They're going to take the champions' treasures. They have to retrieve them within an hour, or they'll be lost forever." Hermione's explanation was jumbled, but Neville grasped the situation immediately. His face turned pale, and he exclaimed, "You mean Harry and Ron have been taken to the bottom of the Black Lake, and your task is to rescue them within an hour?" "I'm glad you figured it out, Neville," Hermione said anxiously. She glanced at the notice in the foyer and was about to rush out the door when Neville caught her arm, saying seriously, "I assume you haven't had breakfast yet, Hermione?" "Breakfast?" Hermione echoed, momentarily confused, then shook her head with a look of disbelief. "Oh no, Neville. Listen to me. Harry and Ron are waiting for me to rescue them. I can't waste any time, or else." "The game hasn't started yet, has it?" Neville held onto Hermione's sleeve, speaking calmly. "Going down to the Black Lake and searching for Harry and Ron in such a vast area is hard work, isn't it? Hermione, you need to eat something." Others caught up with them, the Weasley siblings looking at Hermione with faces drained of color. Even Fred and George, who usually joked around, had fallen silent. The Weasley children often teased each other, but when faced with danger, they united in a remarkable way. Hermione could see a hint of reproach in their eyes, especially from the twins. Ginny considered both Ron and Harry as irreplaceable. "You're right, Neville," Hermione said, pursing her lips. She hurried to the end of the table, grabbed a few slices of bread and pie, devoured them quickly, and squeezed her way out of the crowded hall. "I need to find Professor McGonagall and ask about the situation. Return to your team, Mr. Longbottom, and the rest of you as well." When they found Professor McGonagall, she was leading the Gryffindor students across the lawn. Perhaps frustrated by Gryffindor's slow gathering, she gave Neville a stern look. However, when she turned to Hermione, she managed a gentle smile. "How are you feeling, Hermione?" "Oh, not bad," Hermione replied softly, but then she asked eagerly, "Professor McGonagall, Neville mentioned you took Harry and Ron away last night. Can you tell us what's happening with them now?" "Your judgment is spot on," Professor McGonagall said, pursing her lips. "They've been taken by the mermaids and are currently in the lake, waiting for you to rescue them." Many students were eavesdropping, and when they heard this, a commotion erupted. "Quiet!" Professor McGonagall commanded sternly. She gently pushed Hermione's shoulder. "Go, Hermione. I believe the warriors are gathering. Don't worry. Professor Blaine will cast the spell himself. They'll be fine." Hermione's pale face stirred Professor McGonagall's sympathy, and before Hermione left, she murmured something softly. Despite the bright sunshine, Hermione felt a chill as she approached the Black Lake. She didn't have time to dwell on what awaited her in the water and sprinted along the lakeside towards the other side. The venue for the second task wasn't as grand as the one for the first. It consisted of rows of seats by the lake and 4 platforms for the warriors to launch into the water. The large screen for the live broadcast was still set up. Hermione noticed many small, winged objects flying along the lake and realized they were Professor Blaine's surveillance cameras. She was relieved to know they couldn't operate underwater. The thought of her long tail being projected on a big screen for the entire European wizarding world to see was mortifying. She'd rather spend another half-month at St. Mungo's. As she neared the arena, Hermione saw a table draped with a golden tablecloth on the grass by the lake. Cedric, Fleur, and Crumb stood at the referee's table, watching as Hermione leaped over several small puddles like a swift swallow, approaching quickly. "Sorry, I'm late, aren't I?" she said, sliding on the wet ground near the table for more than 10 feet, stopping firmly at its edge. "Oh, there's still half an hour left," Ludo said with a smile, seemingly impressed by her stamina after such a long run, while Hermione was only slightly out of breath. Professor Moody was patrolling by the lake. Upon seeing Hermione, he pretended to take a leisurely walk, glancing at her as she listened to Ludo's introduction, then shifted his attention to Cedric, who hesitated before nodding almost imperceptibly. "I'm Cho Chang, and Fleur's sister is here." Crumb's choice is unusual. He chose the headmaster of Durmstrang, who is also a referee. "Who are you, Hermione?" 10 minutes before the task began, Professor McGonagall finally led the Gryffindor students over. The field was chaotic. Cedric avoided Ludo and chatted with Hermione. "I think it's Harry and Ron," Hermione said, looking at the sparkling water. As Atticus Blaine stood by the edge of the Black Lake, he pondered which direction to take once he entered the water. "Two?" Cedric exclaimed in surprise, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "They probably couldn't find the one most important to you, so they might as well save themselves the trouble. Have you figured out how to breathe underwater?" "I came up with something just a few days ago," Hermione replied, her gaze still scanning the lake as she conversed with Cedric. "But I'm not sure if it will work. You know, the spells that are effective are usually taught to seniors. I know how to practice, but I'm just guessing." "Oh," Cedric nodded, feigning indifference. He moved closer to Hermione, discreetly slipping a dark green object into his palm. He gently brushed the back of Hermione's hand with his own, pretending to also be focused on the Black Lake. "You helped me in the first task, Hermione, so I feel I should." Hermione, though seemingly distracted, was immediately on alert. She noticed Cedric's subtle movements and recognized what he was trying to give her. She had seen the pattern in the book Sirius had given. This item had once helped Sirius's ancestor overcome great challenges. It was rare and extremely valuable. "No," Hermione recoiled as if shocked. "I appreciate it, Cedric, but no. This is your method, and you should use it yourself." "I have my own plans," she insisted firmly. "This is actually," Cedric began, glancing nervously over his shoulder, worried that the judges might notice their exchange. He wanted to explain, but Hermione had already joined Fleur and Crumb, running towards her diving platform. With a resigned shrug, Cedric slipped the gillweed back into his pocket, having no intention of using it himself. "So," Ludo's voice boomed from the referee's bench, echoing across the dark waters of the Black Lake and reaching the stands. "Our champions are in position. As soon as I blow the whistle, the second task will commence. They have a full hour to retrieve what has been taken from them. I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3, start." End of this chapter. Chapter 844, Unlucky Crumb. The sharp whistle pierced the cold, still air, followed by a burst of cheers and applause from the stands. Hermione was consumed with worry for Harry and Ron's safety. She didn't pause to see what the other champions were doing, nor did she dwell on her own anxieties about potential embarrassment if she didn't perform well. Her sole focus was on bringing her 2 friends back as quickly as possible. Taking off her shoes and socks, Hermione took a deep breath and grabbed the wand that had slipped from her sleeve. As the iridescent bubbles enveloped her head, she exhaled heavily. With one last glance at the pale sunlight, she leaped into the water. The splash was met with another round of applause. The world around her dimmed as she submerged, and her sportswear transformed into a swimsuit, clinging to her body and accentuating her graceful curves. Hermione was relieved that Professor Blaine's surveillance camera wasn't following her. It would have been mortifying if this transformation was witnessed by others. The bubbles distorted by the rippling water waves impaired her vision, but Hermione remained calm, allowing herself to sink to the lake's bottom. When her feet touched the gravel, she pointed her wand at her slender, bud-like body. In a burst of warmth, her legs fused into a light blue-scaled fishtail, wrapping around her. Her loose clothes had always concealed her figure, but now her form was revealed, full of tension and grace. With a slight flick of her tail, Hermione rose several feet, floating midway in the water. So far, everything had gone smoothly, which brought Hermione a sense of relief. She finally had a moment to survey her surroundings. The visibility was worse than anticipated. A faint light penetrated a few feet below the surface, but the deeper, darker waters of the Black Lake seemed to swallow it, rendering everything indistinct. The cheers from the lakeside felt like a distant memory, replaced by the muffled, gurgling sounds beneath the rippling blue waves. The platforms where each champion entered the water were spaced 30 feet apart. Initially, Hermione could vaguely hear Cedric and Krumm's movements on either side of her, but now they had vanished, leaving her with a sense of urgency. "Lumos," Hermione whispered, and the wand's tip emitted a soft glow, like moonlight filtered through dense clouds. Though faint, it dispelled the surrounding darkness. Logically, Harry and Ron were unlikely to be at the lake's edge. They were probably in its center, as mermaids, who had taken them, preferred deep waters. During the Yule Ball, Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine had conjured a fantastical ice castle on the lake, and a large group of mermaids had swum beneath the ice, indicating their proximity to the area. Creating a tail had been a wise decision. Each awkward flick of her tail fin propelled her forward, allowing her to swiftly distance herself from the lakeside. She navigated the strange, dark, and hazy underwater landscape, diving deeper and deeper as the sound of rippling water faded. Even with her wand's light, her visibility was limited to 20 feet, so each flick of her tail revealed a new, mysterious scene emerging from the darkness, undulating and tangled. Through the obstacle as quickly as possible, but the Kaaba was proving to be a formidable opponent. Its agility in the water was unmatched, and it seemed to anticipate Krumm's every move, dodging his spells with ease. Hermione watched the scene unfold from her hiding spot behind the rock, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew she had to act quickly if she wanted to help Krumm without compromising her own mission to rescue Harry and Ron. Her heart pounded in her chest as she weighed her options. Finally, she decided to intervene. With a determined flick of her wand, Hermione sent a jet of shimmering light towards the Kaaba. The spell hit its mark, momentarily stunning the creature and giving Krumm the opening he needed. He seized the opportunity, launching a powerful spell that sent the Kaaba retreating into the depths of the lake. Krumm turned, his shark-like eyes meeting Hermione's. There was a moment of silent acknowledgement between them, a shared understanding of the dangers they faced and the necessity of their alliance, however temporary it might be. With a nod, Hermione resumed her journey, her tail fin propelling her through the murky water. She couldn't afford to linger. Time was of the essence. The lake was vast and filled with unknown perils, but she was determined to find her friends and bring them to safety. As she swam, the oppressive darkness of the lake seemed to close in around her, but Hermione's resolve only grew stronger. She knew that Atticus Blaine, Harry, and Ron were counting on her, and she would not let them down. With each stroke, she pushed herself further into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Atticus Blaine was desperate to rid himself of the Kaaba, but his magic spells failed to make contact. Each time he attempted to break free in a particular direction, the Kaaba, which had ensnared him, would swiftly launch a powerful attack. It would suddenly accelerate, positioning itself directly in front of him, and brandish its sharp-clawed arm, forcing him to retreat. Hermione observed the scene with a furrowed brow, noticing some peculiarities. The Kaaba seemed to be merely toying with Atticus, intent on trapping him without allowing an escape. This behavior was unusual and did not align with the typical actions of a Kaaba. The only logical explanation Hermione could conceive was that the tournament organizers had instructed the Kaaba to merely challenge the competitors without causing them harm. With this realization, Hermione made a mental note. If she encountered a Kaba later, she would avoid engaging with it and steer clear as quickly as possible. As for Atticus, it seemed he was simply having a stroke of bad luck. End of this chapter. Chapter 845, Abyss. Hermione took one last glance at Krum, who was struggling under Kaba's relentless harassment, and turned to leave. She had once been grateful for Krum's assistance during last year's Quidditch final, but his recent slander of Professor Atticus Blaine as a Grindelwald admirer had soured her opinion of him. Besides, according to the rules of the game, she shouldn't interfere in others' affairs. Finding Harry and Ron was her top priority. Yet, Hermione hesitated, frowning as she lingered for nearly a minute. Finally, she sighed deeply and turned back. "Consider it repayment for the help during the Quidditch final," she muttered to herself, raising her wand. "Oh, I wouldn't mind my own business if I were you," a sudden voice interrupted, making Hermione almost believe she was imagining things. She quickly became alert, her eyes darting to a nearby cluster of coral. Among the intricate and colorful branches, a blurry light and shadow sat, observing the scene. "Myrtle!" Hermione wanted to shout, but caught herself, realizing it was best not to make any noise that might alert the battling Krum and Kaba. Instead, she crouched behind the rocks and waved frantically at Myrtle. In such a gloomy and oppressive environment, seeing an old friend was a welcome relief. Suppressing her excitement, Hermione whispered to Myrtle, who floated lazily over, "Why are you here, Myrtle?" "Oh, that annoying freshman barged into my bathroom and flushed me into the sewer. It happens all the time," Myrtle lamented, holding her face in her hands. But in a flash, she became animated again, glancing at Kaba. Sometimes ghosts can see more than the living. "That Kappa, it is... Oh, I can't say. I should learn to keep secrets, especially since it seems to want to help Hogwarts." "What are you talking about, Myrtle?" Hermione asked, frowning. But Myrtle didn't answer. Instead, she let out an ethereal sigh. "If you're looking for those two silly boys, maybe try over there. I won't go with you. I don't really like those mermaids. They always chase me away." With that, Myrtle tossed her head and vanished from Hermione's sight. "Baffling," Hermione muttered, slightly annoyed, but she remembered the direction Myrtle had indicated. Meanwhile, Krum was exhausted from Kaba's harassment. He no longer attempted to escape, but remained in place, his terrifying yet somewhat comical shark mouth open as he panted, despair evident in his yellow eyes. It seemed he had resigned himself to his fate. Hermione pursed her lips and pointed at the uneven rocky ground at the lake's bottom. After a subtle flash of light, a stone full of holes transformed into an emerald-green cucumber. "Hey!" Hermione called out as she emerged from behind the rock, holding the cucumber. Both Krum and Kaba were taken aback, not expecting Hermione to be so close. Once over the initial shock, Krum was overjoyed. He instinctively wanted to swim towards Hermione, but after 2 strokes, he realized that doing so might bring trouble to her as well. Unable to speak with his shark head, Krum spat out a flurry of bubbles and waved frantically at Hermione, urging her to leave quickly. "Try this!" Hermione shouted, though her voice was muffled by the bubbles and thick lake water surrounding her head. "Write your name on the cucumber and throw it to Kaba. Maybe it will stop bothering you." With that, Hermione used the taming curse to guide the cucumber, transformed from the stone, through the lake water, and into Krum's hand with precision. Staring at the green cucumber, Krum was momentarily stunned, then kicked his feet in frustration. When dealing with a creature like Kaba, this was indeed the standard way to rid oneself of it. Atticus Blaine should have learned this in 3rd grade, but over time he had completely forgotten. "Hey, look at this. It's hideous," Krum thought to himself, using all his strength to hurl a cucumber, hastily inscribed with his name, at Kaba. It wasn't until the tumbling cucumber struck Kaba's head that he snapped back to reality and turned, his gaze back to Hermione. Kaba instinctively picked up the cucumber, staring at it blankly before glancing at the 2 young wizards waiting for him. Human-like emotions flickered in his bright black eyes, reflecting the dark lake. Gulu, a large bubble emerged from Kaba's nose. After casting a helpless glance at Hermione, Kaba swung his webbed limbs, sending white splashes like arrows through the water. and quickly vanished into the depths of the lake with his cucumber. As the creature disappeared from view, Crumb collapsed, letting his body sink to the lake's bottom. He sat cross-legged on the rugged rocks, gasping for air. "I know you're tired, but we don't have much time left," Hermione said urgently, rushing to Crumb's side and grabbing his arm. "Less than half an hour remains." Hermione's hair floated gently with the water's movement, and her fitted t-shirt accentuated her upper body's contours. Perhaps due to the shark's keen sense of smell, Crumb detected a dizzying aroma emanating from the girl before him. The scent was alluring, not to mention the light blue scales of her fishtail and the delicate hues of her tail fin, which were enticing to any man. "You go first." Crumb quickly shook off Hermione's fatal temptation. He looked at her with deep gratitude and gestured, "I need to rest." The second part of his message was more complex, conveyed through gestures. After a moment of struggle to understand, Hermione hesitated but ultimately chose to pull Crumb's arm, helping him to his feet. "Go." Crumb's muffled voice emerged from his shark mouth as he broke free from Hermione's support. "I can't keep up. You go first. Time." Seeing Crumb's resolute stance, Hermione pursed her lips. She knew there was no time to waste. "Leave quickly. Kaba might return," she urged. With a worried glance at Crumb, she flicked her tail fin and swiftly swam in the direction Myrtle had indicated. Though she couldn't accurately judge the time, Hermione felt she had been swimming for at least another 20 minutes. Now, only about 10 minutes remained before the competition's deadline. Below her, a vast expanse of black silt stretched out. The lake water swirled into dark vortexes as she moved, and the faint singing that finally reached her ears brought a small measure of comfort to her anxious heart. A group of Grindylows appeared among the water plants bordering the mud and rocks. Judging by their sluggish demeanor, they had clearly been dealt with. When they attempted to attack those passing above, Hermione's sudden acceleration and the flurry of bubbles from her fishtail overwhelmed them. By the time they escaped the bubbles, Hermione was already far away. Hermione longed to pause and admire the mermaid village that usually appeared in her field of vision, a rare sight, but it felt as if a clock in her head was ticking relentlessly. She could only swim faster to silence that annoying sound. Thus, when she finally spotted the 4 wooden pillars surrounded by a large group of mermaids, a soul-deep fatigue nearly lulled her to sleep. But she knew she couldn't rest. She had to bring Harry and Ron back. As Hermione broke through to the surface, she was relieved to find that the menacing mermaids, armed with spears, did not attack her. However, her relief was short-lived. Her heart sank when she noticed that Cho Chang was missing from the 4 wooden pillars. Cedric must have succeeded. He had taken Cho Chang away. This realization brought mixed emotions. Hermione felt a surge of happiness, knowing that Hogwarts had secured first place once again. Yet, a small part of her worried that she might be falling behind. Shaking off these distracting thoughts, Hermione focused on the task at hand. She swam with determination, quickly closing the distance to the 2 pale faces before her. Just as her fingertips brushed against them, a sudden flash of bright green light engulfed her vision, leaving Hermione momentarily stunned. End of this chapter. Chapter 846, The Grave. Without any warning or preparation, Hermione felt as if she had been thrust into a spinning washing machine. The world around her whirled violently, light and shadow merging into a dizzying blur, while her ears were filled with a fierce, whistling sound. The suddenness of it all made her scream involuntarily. The abrupt surge of magic transformed her tail fin back into 2 slender legs, and the bubbles that had enveloped her head burst. Amidst the chaos, all she could do was cling to Harry and Ron, who were still in front of her. When the world finally steadied, Hermione realized that not only Harry and Ron were with her, but also Krum, Fleur, Gabrielle, and Professor Karkaroff. The oppressive pressure of the deep water vanished, replaced by the musty, damp air that filled her nostrils. The treasures with pallid faces gradually regained consciousness as the ropes binding them loosened. Harry blinked, trying to clear the haze from his vision. It took him a moment to realize that water droplets clinging to his glasses were the cause of his blurred sight. He quickly removed his glasses, wiped them on his robes, and put them back on to assess their surroundings. The first thing he noticed was Ron beside him, tentatively stepping on the gray, rocky platform they stood upon. "You did it, Hermione! You brought Ron and me out from the bottom of the lake!" Harry exclaimed, gripping Hermione's arm with excitement, despite her own dizziness. "What's our rank?" But as he spoke, Harry sensed something was amiss. Gabrielle and Karkaroff were there too, and this was not the Black Lake. In fact, this wasn't Hogwarts at all. The familiar hills surrounding the castle were nowhere to be seen. Instead, they stood on a dark, overgrown cemetery, with the silhouette of a small church looming behind yew trees to the right. To the left, a hill rose, and Harry could just make out an old house perched on its slope. The sky above was overcast, dark as night, which was odd since Professor McGonagall had called him out at dawn when the sky was clear and bright. A strong sense of unease gripped Harry's heart. "Hermione?" he asked, noticing her trembling as she stared at the tombstones. "I don't know, Harry," Hermione replied, her voice tinged with confusion. "As soon as I met you, we used the portkey to teleport." "Nonsense!" Karkaroff, the only adult on the platform, interjected. Panic flickered in his eyes, but he glared at Hermione with a fierce expression. "I've never heard of the second task involving portkeys. What kind of trick is Hogwarts playing? Or is this another one of Blaine's genius ideas?" Karkaroff's disdainful mention of Professor Atticus Blaine drew angry glares from the three Hogwarts students. Yet in this situation, Karkaroff seemed unconcerned with their displeasure. He roughly pushed Ron aside and descended the steps from the platform. Standing below, he surveyed the area, his confusion evident, convincing Harry, Ron, and Hermione that even the multitasking Durmstrang headmaster was clueless about their predicament. "Actually, he was right about one thing," Ron whispered to Harry and Hermione, not wanting Karkaroff to think he agreed with him. "Professor Blaine does enjoy creating surprises for people, but he usually gives us hints," Harry countered, attempting a weak smile. Gabrielle stood behind the trio, her face pale and her young body trembling, clearly overwhelmed by fear. Atticus Blaine immediately considered the situation. "Is it just us?" Harry asked. "What about Cedric, his group, and Crumb?" As they emerged into the open air, their sportswear quickly dried, though their hair remained wet. The cold was so intense that frost formed on Hermione's hair. She shook her head, trying to dispel her confusion. "When I saw you, Cedric and Cho Chang were gone. Crumb was exhausted by a kappa and fell behind me. I didn't see Fleur," Hermione explained. "Oh," Ron raised his eyebrows, glancing at Karkaroff, who appeared indifferent but was clearly eavesdropping. "I guess this is the second tag of the game. Warriors and their important people face challenges together. That's Professor Blaine's style, isn't it? It's a pity someone fell behind and couldn't enter the second stage." Karkaroff's expression turned fierce. He glared at Ron, baring his yellow teeth. "Boy, if Blaine really devised such a foolish plan, then unfortunately, this competition will be invalid. He changed the competition items and regulations without my consent." "Professor Blaine's plan doesn't need your approval," Ron retorted, unable to withstand Karkaroff's intimidating gaze. Harry stepped forward, returning the cold stare. After a tense moment, they both looked away. "We'll see," Karkaroff gritted his teeth, "if this is really Blaine's doing." "Should we take a look around?" Ron suggested. The cold tombstones standing amidst the eerie mist reminded him of a defense against the dark arts test in second grade, where he was defeated by the inferi brought by Professor Blaine. Now, he felt he had a chance to prove himself. "If this is a test range and not an accident, we can't let Hufflepuff's pretty boy steal the show, can we?" Ron added enthusiastically. No one responded to Ron's call. Karkaroff and Harry wore grim expressions, both sensing impending disaster. "Let's look around first," Hermione finally said, breaking the awkward silence. "We can't just stand here, can we? Come on, Gabrielle, you can follow us." The group descended from the high platform, with Hermione assisting the incapacitated Gabrielle. They formed a defensive formation, reminiscent of their physical education class. Although Ron's dodging skills were still lacking, Harry was eager to practice with him. Karkaroff glanced disdainfully at the three young students in formation. He considered leaving them behind to act independently, but, for reasons unknown, chose to stay with the group. Tombstones, exuding the scent of death, were scattered across the crooked graves. Harry and Hermione took the lead, with Ron covering the rear. They navigated the two connected graveyards, forming a Y-shaped path. A fork appeared before them. One path lined with decayed branches leading to numerous tombstones, and another ascending a hill to an old house perched on the ridge. "Which way?" Harry asked, looking ahead but glancing at Hermione from the corner of his eye. Hermione hesitated, frowning slightly. Logically, if this was a large-scale exploration mission, the old house seemed the more likely target. However, the fog-laden tombstone path might also be the right choice. No one consulted Karkaroff for his opinion, even though he was the most skilled in magic and had the most experience among the group. Harry and his friends were well aware that this man, who observed them with a cold demeanor, was likely testing them with sinister intentions, dangerous intentions. "Us," Hermione began, her mind racing. She directed her gaze toward the ridge, where the view was more expansive. If Cedric and Cho Chang had arrived there first, they should be easy to spot. "Listen," Ron suddenly interrupted, his face pale with fear. Each word he uttered trembled with anxiety, and his voice, though suppressed, sounded as if he were on the verge of tears. "Someone is crying. It's a female ghost." Chapter 847, Death Comes as Promised. "Stop talking nonsense, Ron." Hermione scolded softly, though her face turned pale upon hearing the voice, and her breath caught in her throat. The sound emanated from the misty path lined with tombstones. It was indeed the cry of some creature. The intermittent, suppressed sobs were high-pitched and harsh, echoing through the eerie graveyard and filled with boundless despair. The legs of the three companions trembled slightly, and Karkaroff's breathing quickened as he squinted at the path. "Let's go over and take a look," Harry said, gritting his teeth. "Are you crazy, Harry?" Ron exclaimed in disbelief. "You know there could be danger there." "If this really falls within the confines of a game event," Harry replied, holding his breath, "then we could be missing a key clue." "What if it's not?" Karkaroff, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke up. "If not, Professor Karkaroff," Hermione retorted. "If we came here by accident or were led into a trap, avoiding it by taking another path won't help us." It was an irrefutable argument. Even though he disliked the self-assured young witch, Karkaroff had to admit she was right. Was the current situation a test, a simple accident, or a deliberate plan? Despite having faced life-and-death situations before, Karkaroff couldn't decide. He coldly observed the three young wizards from Hogwarts advancing cautiously. Among them was Harry Potter. If they perished here, and it was due to the latter two scenarios, it would be disastrous. No one could blame him. As he pondered, Karkaroff's expression grew more sinister. Regardless, they chose the misty path. The cold, damp mist clung to their faces, and the black crows flying over the cemetery added to the suffocating atmosphere. The sobs grew louder as they approached. Hermione felt increasingly certain that the sadness and despair in the cries were genuine, not staged. They passed tombstone after tombstone, their shadows looming like the specter of death itself. "Oh, I'm so stupid," Harry muttered under his breath when the outline of a creature became vaguely visible. His heart skipped a beat. He took the lead, using his wand to cast a bright light that pierced the darkness. This action made the others realize why Harry had called himself foolish. Everyone, including Karkaroff, solemnly followed suit, letting their wands shine. For a moment, the overlapping radiance resembled a bright moon rising from the cemetery. The desperate sobs abruptly ceased. The creature, lost in its inescapable sadness, realized that someone familiar had entered the cemetery. Thump, thump, thump. As Ron caught sight of the creature, his teeth began to chatter. Harry and Hermione, standing in front of him, fared no better. They resembled cats under serious threat, their hair standing on end, a biting chill racing from their tailbones to the tops of their heads, nearly causing them to drop their wands. Flash, flash! Hermione's voice was torn and hoarse, like a traveler lost in the desert, accompanied by tremors and cries. The light revealed a man lying on the damp, dead leaves on the ground. It was unclear whether he was dead or alive, but one thing was certain. He had suffered brutal torture. His hands and feet were bent backward, his limp posture resembling a puppet manipulated by unseen forces. Crouch, Karkaroff, being the tallest, was the first to identify the man. When Crouch's name escaped his lips, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. No one would have thought that their current predicament stemmed from the competition's test. The only plausible explanation was that they had been ensnared in a plot. "I've had enough!" Karkaroff's chest heaved violently, his face a mask of panic and horror. Staggering backward, he shouted, "I want to leave here." No one stopped him. He raised his wand, attempting to apparate. Yet, as he remained within Harry and his friend's sight, it was clear his attempt had failed. Someone had blocked the space. Harry and Hermione, who had attended that particular class, realized this immediately. Regret gnawed at their hearts. Despite physical education being the magic class Harry had listened to most intently, he still blamed himself for not heeding Professor Blaine's warnings. The fireplace and the portkey, he lacked the ability to create the latter. Building a fireplace wasn't difficult, but he didn't know how to connect it to the Floo network privately, nor did he have any Floo powder with him. "Harry Potter," Twinkle spoke, its voice tinged with sadness and panic, now replaced by horror and disbelief. It clearly didn't fully grasp the current panic. "Hey, Harry Potter?" But its voice brought Crouch back to some semblance of consciousness, making Harry and the others realize that Mr. Crouch was still alive. "Harry Potter?" Crouch repeated. Harry couldn't fathom the strength of will Crouch possessed at that moment. As Crouch raised his head with difficulty, they saw the senior Ministry of Magic official, his meticulously combed gray hair soaked with blood. Yet, he still managed to lift his head tenaciously. His eyes were clouded with confusion. The light from Harry's wand made it difficult for him to immediately recognize who was there. He strained to open his eyes wide, his eyeballs bulging as he desperately tried to see clearly. "It's me, sir," Harry said, lowering his wand. The light that had enveloped his pale face dimmed slightly. He panted, each breath feeling like swallowing a mouthful of ice water in the dead of winter. "It's you." Twinkle's support allowed Barty Crouch to see Harry's face more clearly. He finally confirmed that Harry Potter was indeed in front of him, and then, "Run!" It was unimaginable that Crouch, in such a state, could still muster such a loud sound. His roar, full of despair, echoed throughout the cemetery, causing the black crows roosting everywhere to flap their wings simultaneously. The once-dead cemetery seemed to come alive. "Run!" Crouch screamed with all his might, the loudest cry of his life. "He's coming!" Everyone, dominated by fear, began to stagger backward. However, from a distance, a cold voice pierced the fog. "Oh, Barty, haven't these days of training taught you any manners? I'm afraid you have no right to drive away the guests I worked so hard to invite." A figure emerged from the mist, a pale man with a crazed smile, cradling an ugly dwarf in his arms. The moment their eyes met, Harry fell to the ground. His scar throbbed with excruciating pain, unlike anything he had ever experienced. His body convulsed and curled up as he clutched his face, feeling as if his head might explode. Harry's reaction mirrored that of Igor Karkaroff. He had failed to disapparate and collapsed, clutching his arms as if they were melting. His dark yellow pupils shrank to pinpoints in sheer terror, his entire body trembling like a leaf. "Harry!" Hermione's voice was choked with tears as she and Ron rushed to his side, trying to pull him up from the ground. "I always thought that Cleona was unwilling to accept the task," she began, her voice trailing off as the gravity of their situation settled in. "I didn't expect her to prepare so many guests for me," the ugly dwarf sneered, a cruel smile twisting his features. "She probably means well, but not everyone is worthy of witnessing this great moment. Oh, Barty, perhaps you could tidy up for me. Remember, you mustn't harm an old friend. Do you understand, Barty?" "With pleasure, my lord," Barty replied eagerly. Before Hermione and Ron could comprehend the implications of this exchange, a chilling voice rang out. "Avada Kedavra!" A whistling sound pierced the air, followed by a sharp scream that shattered the dim sky. A blinding green light erupted, searing the eyes of those present. The eerie glow illuminated the shocked faces of Hermione and Ron. They watched in horror as the green light struck the smallest member of their group, who had been trailing behind them, trembling. The life drained swiftly from her youthful, delicate face, and her golden hair dulled. Her body crumpled to the ground. Lel, eyeless, her once vibrant blue eyes now staring blankly at the overcast sky. Gabrielle was dead. End of this chapter. Chapter 848, Nobility and Shamelessness. Hermione suddenly felt as though the air around her had thickened, becoming almost suffocating. It was as if she had been plunged back into the depths of the Black Lake, the oppressive atmosphere pressing against her, causing her ears to ring. Ron stopped pulling on Harry, his face turning pale and contorted as if he were on the verge of a heart attack, each breath a monumental effort. For what felt like an endless second, Hermione and Ron stared blankly at Gabrielle's face, her emotionless blue eyes resembling the vacant windows of an abandoned house. Death, calm and real, was a sensation that no amount of Professor Blaine's Rocklance simulations could replicate. What was happening? What had happened? Images flashed through Hermione's mind. Winky and the dying Mr. Barty Crouch, the grotesque Rumpelstiltskin, and a younger Barty, Cleona's graveyard, and death. Hermione felt her once reliable intellect falter, unable to piece together the fragments of information into a coherent explanation. She watched as the young Barty respectfully arranged the dwarf, conjuring a sofa atop a collapsed tombstone. His eyes, filled with a manic excitement, locked onto them, as if he were eager to tear them apart. The killing would continue. Little Barty understood his master well. The mudblood was unworthy of witnessing the grand event about to unfold, but the red-haired Weasley boy might survive, thanks to the bloodline of his ancestors, if he was willing to grovel at the master's feet and serve him. "You will make a grave mistake, Master Barty," Twinkle cried, throwing herself over the unconscious old Barty, her eyes brimming with tears and pleading. As Barty Crouch Jr. passed by, he flashed a sickly smile. "Just wait and see, Twinkle," he sneered. "I will assist the reborn Dark Lord and receive rewards others can only dream of. And you, Winky, you too will be rewarded. As an elf, you will have the honor of witnessing the Dark Lord's rebirth. The Dark Lord, reborn." Crucial information, Hermione thought, her expression dull. She had no time to gauge Harry's state or Ron's expression. The young Barty she saw was likely the one Sirius had mentioned, Mr. Crouch's Death Eater's son, presumed dead in Azkaban, now approaching them once more. He raised his wand, his eyes locked on them with ferocity. Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine had suspected that a Death Eater had been lurking in the box during the Quidditch final last year, conjuring the Dark Mark. This Death Eater, connected to Barty Crouch and Winky, was Barty Crouch Jr. There was more to unravel, but Hermione had no time to think. She saw Barty Crouch Jr. raise his wand, understanding that after Gabrielle, he intended to target her next. But why her? Predict your opponent's attack intentions. A flash of insight crossed her mind, recalling Professor Blaine's solemn face as he imparted those words. It couldn't be the killing curse. She was too close to Harry, and it might inadvertently harm him. The Dark Lord would kill everyone, but he likely had plans for Harry and wouldn't kill him just yet. So Barty Crouch Jr. aimed to separate her and Ron from Harry. As the malevolent wind sliced through the smoke towards her, Hermione, crouched on the ground, sprang up and fiercely waved her wand. "Protego," she shouted. The spell erupted in a dazzling flash, the force lifting her damp hair. She didn't stay with Harry, but instead rushed to shield him and Ron. "Take Harry and leave. Find Karkaroff if he wants to live." Hermione's voice rang out, sharp and urgent, the shoulder halting his advance. It was Karkaroff, his eyes now filled with a newfound resolve. "You have courage, boy," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "But courage alone won't save us. We need a plan." Ron hesitated, torn between the urgency of the situation and the wisdom in Karkaroff's words. He glanced back at Hermione, who was still darting through the ruins, her spells lighting up the darkened sky like fireworks. She was holding her own, but for how long? "We can't leave her," Ron insisted, his voice cracking with emotion. "She's buying us time, but she can't hold out forever." Karkaroff nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll get Harry and Gabrielle to safety," he promised, his voice firm. "But you must promise me you'll come back alive. We need you, Ron." With a reluctant nod, Ron agreed. He watched as Karkaroff, with surprising agility, hoisted Harry and Gabrielle and began to move away from the battlefield. Ron's heart ached with every step they took, but he knew he had to trust Karkaroff to do his part. Turning back to the fray, Ron steeled himself. He sprinted towards Hermione, who was now locked in a fierce exchange with Barty Crouch Jr. The air crackled with magic, and the ground shook with each spell that hit its mark. Ron's mind raced, trying to think of a way to tip the scales in their favor. As he approached, he saw Hermione stumble, her defenses faltering under the relentless assault. Without a second thought, Ron raised his wand and shouted, "Expelliarmus!" The spell shot from his wand, aimed directly at Barty Jr.'s hand. The impact was enough to momentarily disarm Barty Jr., his wand flying from his grasp. Hermione seized the opportunity, launching a powerful, stunning spell that sent Barty Jr. sprawling to the ground. Breathing heavily, Hermione turned to Ron, her eyes wide with relief and gratitude. "I thought you were leaving," she said, her voice barely audible over the din of the battle. "I couldn't," Ron replied, his voice firm. "Not without you." Together, they stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The battle was far from over, but with each other's support they felt a renewed sense of hope. As the dark clouds loomed overhead, they prepared to fight on, determined to protect their friends and defeat the darkness threatening their world. A powerful force yanked Atticus Blaine backward by the collar, nearly knocking the wind out of him. "You fool!" Ron shouted, spinning around to confront Karkaroff. "I should have known it was you!" Before Ron could say another word, a wand was thrust between his eyebrows, silencing him instantly. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at Karkaroff, struggling to comprehend the betrayal. The ferocity in Karkaroff's gaze was unmistakable, and in that chilling moment, a realization dawned on Ron. Igor Karkaroff was a Death Eater. End of this chapter. Chapter 8 and 49, Betrayal and Battle. "You filthy traitor!" Ron's voice trembled with a mix of shock and fury, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Hermione was planning to let you leave first, and you betrayed us." "Silence, you ignorant child," Karkaroff snarled, his face twisted in a mask of fear and anger. Blood dripped from his broken nose, soaking his beard and staining his dry lips. It trickled down to the hem of his clothes, yet he made no move to wipe it away. He pressed his wand firmly against Ron's forehead, using his other hand to support Harry, who was slumped under his arm. "Master!" Karkaroff's eyes strained to see through the billowing smoke and flames. His voice, hoarse and trembling, was laced with desperation. "My great master, I, Igor, have captured Harry Potter and his friends for you." Silence greeted him from beyond the smoke, perhaps due to indifference, or maybe the Dark Lord was taken aback by Karkaroff's audacity. Karkaroff's body shook violently, his pale face a canvas of despair, illustrating the inevitable end he feared. Ron seethed with hatred, a feeling more intense than any he had ever known. If he could, he would have cast the Cruciatus Curse on Karkaroff without hesitation. But at such close range, he lacked the confidence to evade Karkaroff's attack. With his back to the battlefield, Ron was unaware of Hermione's situation, but the occasional clear voice, cutting through the explosions, reassured him that she was still fighting. Yet, Barty Crouch Jr.'s increasingly hysterical roars heightened Ron's anxiety. He failed to notice Harry, clutched under Karkaroff's arm, clenching his fists, his green eyes ablaze with determination. "The great Dark Lord, my revered master." Karkaroff's panic grew with the lack of response. "Is there anything else I can do for you? Shall I dispose of that mudblood for you?" "Ron is right." Harry, seemingly half dead and restrained, suddenly spoke. Before Karkaroff could react, Harry's fist connected with his face, striking the broken bridge of his nose. Karkaroff's eyes widened in shock as he fell to the ground, screaming. "You are nothing but a filthy traitor," Harry shouted, his voice filled with righteous anger. With a flick of his wand, Karkaroff's wand slipped silently into Harry's hand. "Harry!" Ron exclaimed in surprise. "You're back to normal, your scar." "Let's help Hermione, Ron," Harry interrupted, his face pale and glistening with cold sweat. Despite his evident weakness, the urgency of the situation left no room for hesitation. He gripped his wand tightly and charged towards Hermione, who was locked in battle with Barty Crouch Jr. A sudden flash of red lightning illuminated the night sky, cutting through the smoke and dust. It shattered the magical barrier Barty had precariously set up. Rocks, like bullets, sliced through the air, grazing Barty's cheek and smashing into a nearby tree. Barty Crouch Jr. staggered backward instinctively, but a dead vine, animated as if alive, lunged at him like a venomous snake, attempting to ensnare him. Unfortunately, just as the withered vine coiled around Barty's ankle, the crazed Death Eater fell. Atticus Blaine waved his wand, releasing a ghostly light that severed the withered vine. This series of well-coordinated attacks left Barty Crouch Jr. both surprised and slightly panicked. He scrambled to his feet, nearly rolling as he dodged behind a tombstone, only to realize that the attacks had ceased. With a shaky hand, he brushed aside a lock of sweat-soaked hair clinging to his forehead and gasped for air. "What happened?" he muttered to himself. Dueling a real Death Eater was an unprecedented experience for Hermione. The pressure was immense, as if invisible hands of death were gripping her heart. One wrong move could mean the end. Her sportswear was drenched in sweat, and she appeared more disheveled than Barty Crouch Jr. Her spells lacked the power of his, and her magical strength was slightly inferior. If not for a stroke of luck some time ago, she might have ended up as lifeless as Gabrielle. Hermione was convinced that if the duel continued, she would be the one to fall. The timely intervention of Harry and Ron shifted the balance, giving her a moment to catch her breath. Yet, she felt no relief. Instead, she leaned against a crumbling wall, glaring at Harry and Ron as they rushed to her side. "What's going on? Why are you still here?" she demanded angrily. "That bastard tried to kidnap me and Harry," Ron explained quickly, unable to utter the name. "I would never leave you, Hermione," Harry added firmly. A tense silence fell over the cemetery, punctuated only by the distant sounds of explosions as both sides paused to regain their strength. "There's only one chance, and we have to try," Hermione said, shifting her focus from the chaos to finding a way out. She pulled Harry and Ron close and whispered, "Apparition won't work. We can only rely on Winky. Crouch, I mean the one from the Ministry of Magic. I just asked you to leave. Harry, Winky might be able to help us." "It's just an elf, Hermione. What can it do?" Ron asked, eyes wide with confusion. "Think about the house elves at Hogwarts, Ron. The wizard's anti-apparition spell doesn't affect their magic. Only special magic can restrain them. We have to try. It's our only chance." "If that's the case," Ron exclaimed, his face lighting up with hope. "Dom, if you're its owner, you can summon it here, and it can take us away." Hermione's expression was conflicted. She had considered this but hesitated. "No, I can't," she said, shaking her head. "I can't risk it. I'm not sure if the house elves' teleportation magic will work here." The memory of Gabrielle, Fleur's beloved little sister, weighed heavily on Harry's heart. He knew Hermione wouldn't want to drag Tom into their dire situation unless absolutely necessary. Her eyes darted around until she spotted Winky. They needed to approach quietly, concealing their true intentions. "I thought you could handle more responsibility, Barty," a chilling voice suddenly echoed, laced with impatience and disappointment. The speaker had witnessed everything and was unimpressed that a few underage wizards had left his loyal follower helpless. "I can do everything for you, Master," Barty Jr. cried out, feeling deeply insulted. He charged out from behind the tombstone, determined to find the three young wizards who had shamed him. But the cold voice of the Dark Lord interrupted once more. "Enough!" Atticus Blaine's voice cut through the tension, freezing little Barty in place. Barty's eyes burned with hatred as he glared at them, his expression reminiscent of the twisted Rumpelstiltskin. Despite the mounting evidence pointing to Atticus as the feared Dark Lord, the trio clung to a sliver of hope, unwilling to accept the grim reality that would seal their fate. At the utterance of "enough," the three friends tensed, poised to dodge whatever the diminutive figure might unleash. They were determined not to surrender without a fight. Yet, what unfolded next starkly illustrated the chasm between their abilities and those of the most powerful wizards. A force, as overwhelming as a torrent, descended from above, pinning them in place and leaving no room for escape. Two sickening green lights sliced through the smoke, narrowly missing Harry, who found himself immobilized. The oppressive force vanished, but Harry's joints felt stiff and unyielding, as if rusted shut. With great effort, he managed to move, his eyes finally falling upon the tragic scene before him. There, amidst the rubble, lay the lifeless bodies of Hermione and Ron. Their eyes stared blankly at the sky, devoid of any trace of pain. They were gone. End of this chapter. Chapter 850, Finally Boom. It was as if an invisible force had pulled at his spine, and Atticus Blaine found himself kneeling. The world around him fell into an eerie silence, so profound that he could hear the blood coursing through his veins. His friends, Ron and Hermione, lay still on a heap of rubble. They neither groaned in pain nor attempted to rise. They simply lay there, their eyes devoid of life, gazing blankly at the sky. The trio had first met on the Hogwarts Express 4 years ago. Though their initial encounter was far from pleasant, Atticus remembered every detail vividly. It seemed as though fate had destined them to become friends at Hogwarts. Together, they had faced numerous challenges to protect the Philosopher's Stone, saving it from Quirrell and Voldemort. They had brewed Polyjuice Potion in Myrtle's bathroom and ventured into the Chamber of Secrets to rescue Ginny. They had even followed Hagrid into the Forbidden Forest to save Sirius from werewolves and Dementors. At Hogwarts, they attended classes, shared meals, played, and embarked on nighttime adventures together. Beyond the school grounds, they experienced the Quidditch World Cup and visited the orphanage where Professor Blaine had grown up. Hermione was the brightest witch Atticus had ever known, always there to assist him in critical moments. Ron, on the other hand, taught him the joy of having a brotherly bond. Atticus had always believed their friendship would endure, even as they left Hogwarts to build their own families and lives, just as his parents had with Sirius and Remus. But now they lay motionless on the ground. Atticus knelt there, feeling hollow from mind to body, as if he were sinking into a bottomless abyss. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. His green eyes, once vibrant, were now dim, and his heart, once filled with courage, was gripped by the fear of reality. "No," he repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. How could Ron and Hermione be dead? It was absurd as someone claiming that Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine were the most terrifying Dark Lords. Atticus trembled, not from fear, but from an overwhelming numbness. His heart was devoid of emotion, leaving him feeling cold and utterly exhausted. So very tired. Somehow, Barty Crouch Jr. had escaped the clutches of Azkaban. When the Death Eaters seized Atticus by the collar and dragged him away, he lacked the strength to resist. Perhaps it was the sting of his previous defeat that made Barty Crouch Jr. handle him so roughly, showing no concern for his injuries. The sharp gravel on the ground tore at his sportswear, leaving his legs bloodied. Finally, they reached their destination. Barty Jr. flung Atticus in front of a towering tombstone, the impact jarring his back. In the flickering wand light, Atticus glimpsed a name etched into the stone: Tom Riddle. Eager to prove himself, Barty Jr. worked swiftly, conjuring ropes with magic to bind Atticus tightly to the tombstone, securing him from neck to ankles. He checked the bindings repeatedly, ensuring there was no chance of escape. Satisfied, he tore a piece of his robe, fashioned it into a cloth ball, and stuffed it roughly into Atticus's mouth before departing. Throughout the ordeal, Atticus remained still, his gaze fixed on the spot where Hermione and Ron had fallen. He could now hear faint sounds, the soft sobs of Winky, the house elf, echoing from a distance, though the words were indistinct. Barty Crouch Sr. appeared truly dead, lying motionless since the warning had been issued. A hissing sound emerged from the grass, and a large snake with vivid stripes slithered past. Atticus Blaine. The creature raised its upper body, its scarlet snake eyes and sharp fangs appearing more terrifying than any basilisk Harry had ever encountered. "Nagini, he is not suitable to be your dinner, even if he is dead." Rumpelstiltskin's lazy voice pierced the darkness, reaching Harry's ears. "I will return his body to Dumbledore. I believe he will appreciate this gift. Just wait, you will have a good meal. Just wait a little longer." Nagini flicked her tongue nonchalantly, licking Harry's cheek before obediently curling up and returning to her hibernation. Little Barty returned with a sickly smile, carrying a heavy stone cauldron. It seemed to be filled with water, and as Harry's hearing returned, he could hear the splashing within. This cauldron was larger than any Harry had ever used, large enough to accommodate an adult. After catching his breath, little Barty used his wand to light a fire beneath the cauldron. The liquid inside heated rapidly, boiling and sparking as if it were aflame. The steam thickened, blurring even little Barty's figure. "Quick!" Harry heard the sharp, cold voice again, and his scar began to throb painfully, cutting through his numbness and making him gasp. When little Barty left and returned, the entire surface of the cauldron's water was sparkling, as if studded with diamonds. "It's done, Master!" Little Barty's voice trembled with excitement, while a loud wail echoed from nearby. "Now," commanded the cold voice. Little Barty carried a dwarf to the cauldron. The sight of the ugly, pustule-covered face behind the fog made Harry tremble, but his mouth was tightly gagged, preventing him from crying out in pain. Yet, he didn't want to show pain. The hatred in his heart, like a raging sea, surpassed everything, making him unwilling to show weakness. Barty Crouch Jr. lifted the dwarf reverently and gently placed it into the cauldron. The sparks that flew upon contact with the potion's surface allowed Harry to clearly see the flat face, with abscesses constantly bursting and healing. Harry whimpered and roared internally. The pain in his scar felt like it was being seared by fire, but he refused to give in. He struggled, trying to tear the dwarf apart, but it was futile. Anger was useless. Nothing could be changed. Rumpelstiltskin's presence was as heavy as the bottom of a pot, making a soft sound. Barty took a deep breath and cleared his throat. His sickly face seemed to glow, as if he were relishing the honor of friendly fire. Father's bones, accidentally donated, can regenerate your son. The ground beneath Harry's feet cracked, and a small wisp of dust rose into the air, responding to Barty Jr.'s call, and gently fell into the cauldron. The pages of the Diamond Edition cracked, hissing and sparking. The flesh of your servant, donated voluntarily, can make your master reborn. Little Barty seemed to be reciting a poem, his voice high-pitched and passionate. Without hesitation, he pointed his wand at his left hand. After a flash of light, his palm fell into the cauldron. Die! Despicable! Damn it! Harry forced himself to witness the bloody scene. His eyes strained to penetrate the fiery red light emitted by the potion. He harbored evil thoughts, hoping to see Barty Crouch Jr. bleed to death. However, little Barty's insane belief overcame the pain he endured. Amid Twinkle's mournful cries and Harry's hateful gaze, his pale face, twisted with a sick smile, approached Harry. Harry wanted to spit out the cloth gagging him and use his teeth to tear Barty Jr.'s neck apart, but he couldn't. He could only watch as Barty Crouch Jr. twisted his neck, drawing blood from his arms. The blood of your enemy, forced to sacrifice, can resurrect your enemy. Despite his weakness, young Barty staggered but managed to complete his task. He hurled the glass vial containing Harry's blood into the crucible, causing the liquid to emit a brilliant glow. In the black velvet darkness, the distant roars of sinister creatures could be faintly heard, and the air thrummed with an inexplicable power. This indescribable force weighed heavily on Harry's soul, suffocating him to the brink of unconsciousness. From the swirling white mist, a figure began to emerge, a man, gaunt and towering, resembling a skeleton. With great effort, Barty rose to his feet, retrieved a robe from seemingly nowhere, and draped it over his master with a raspy breath. The emaciated man stepped out of the crucible, fixing his snake-like eyes on Harry. It was a face Harry had seen countless times in his nightmares over the past 3 years. Paler than bone, with a nose as flat as a serpent's and nostrils reduced to mere slits. A rumble of dark thunder rolled across the ominous sky, its sound reverberating through the earth and echoing across the fields, as if to proclaim, Voldemort is resurrected. End of this chapter. Chapter 851. The Return of Voldemort. Voldemort shifted his gaze from Harry to his own body, a form he had longed for over the past 15 years. His hands, resembling large, pale spiders, moved with a delicate grace as his slender fingers traced over his chest, arms, and face, as if caressing precious treasures. His breathing was soft, and his expression was one of pure ecstasy. "Master," Barty Crouch Jr. murmured, his complexion as pale as death itself, a result of the blood loss from his severed arm. Despite his grievous wound, he crawled with difficulty to Voldemort's feet, using his remaining arm to kiss the Dark Lord's insteps with fervent devotion. Voldemort, meanwhile, was admiring the wand he had retrieved from his robe pocket. For the past 15 years, he had lacked the power to wield it with authority. Barty's kiss drew his attention, as if he had only just realized the presence of a loyal Death Eater at his side. Despite Barty's care over the past year and his role in Voldemort's resurrection, the Dark Lord raised an eyebrow, and Harry could see a hint of mockery rather than gratitude in his smile. "Your performance tonight was somewhat disappointing, Barty," Voldemort said softly. "Fortunately, no one else is here to witness it. What would others say if they saw the childish duel that just occurred? The Dark Lord's loyal Death Eaters defeated by 3 underage children at Hogwarts. If word of this gets out, Where will my reputation go? Barty's face was nearly pressed into the dirt, too ashamed to defend himself. In the presence of the great Dark Lord, all excuses were futile. He could only express his deep shame for having embarrassed his master. "Stand up, Barty," Voldemort said lazily. "I promised to reward you once all this was over. The Dark Lord keeps his promises, especially to those who are loyal. Rise. You will not be among those who lose their lives tonight." Barty finally lifted his head, dirt clinging to his forehead, tears of gratitude in his eyes. Realizing that Barty might die from excessive blood loss, Voldemort raised his wand and waved it in the air. The wand's tip traced a silvery line that shimmered and twisted into the shape of a gleaming silver hand, which he placed on Barty's severed arm. The pain ceased immediately, and Barty's expression was one of astonishment, as if he hadn't expected his master to heal him, let alone reward him. "You are too kind, my lord," Barty exclaimed. "This is the reward you deserve, Barty. Compensation for the injustices you've endured over the years," Voldemort replied. "There will be more honors than this, of course." He leaned over, grasping Barty's arm and pushing his sleeve up to the elbow. Harry, meanwhile, expected Voldemort's first act after his resurrection to be his own execution. Yet, he felt no fear. In fact, he welcomed it. With Ron and Hermione gone, the wizarding world had ended for him. However, Voldemort seemed uninterested in taking his life, discarding him as if he were insignificant. A bright red tattoo, a skull with a snake emerging from its mouth, appeared on Barty's arm, the same pattern that had been seen above the Quidditch Finals box. "Praise your loyalty and awareness publicly before everyone," Voldemort said, his pale cheeks curving into a smile. "They must have noticed by now. We'll see. We'll see." He pressed his long, pale index finger onto Barty's arm, watching the bright red mark turn black with a cruel and proud expression. "Let's see how many have the courage to return, and how many are foolish enough not to." "I will always follow you, my master," little Barty declared, though the excessive blood loss made him dizzy. He struggled to stand, every cell in his body resonating with admiration for Voldemort. Yet, Voldemort did not respond. Instead, he paced around the fallen crucible, inhaling deeply as if savoring the fresh air. Suddenly, he halted, his eyes filled with hatred as he turned to Harry, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Go and bring them, Barty," Voldemort commanded, referring to Harry Potter's free ends. "Let him see them one last time before he is gone. The little girl you killed will make a nice meal for Nagini. She will enjoy it. Wait, Nagini," he added, raising his hand to the snake coiled in a haystack. Nagini stirred excitedly, her tongue flickering in anticipation. "It will take a while. When they all arrive, don't forget your father and Twinkle. I must say, I quite like your elf, Barty. Compared to the forests of Albania, having it around is much more comfortable. Ah, and our old friends. How could I forget? I think he must be a gift from Cleona. I didn't ask her to do this, but it must have been a simple task for her. I must admit, I appreciate this gift, so I can be more lenient with her past rudeness." Little Barty bowed deeply, then eagerly set off to carry out Voldemort's orders, inviting everyone in the cemetery to remain. "Harry Potter," Voldemort murmured, watching Barty leave. His scarlet gaze returned to Harry's face. "I imagine you must be confused. I will explain, but be patient. Let me tell you something first. You are standing on the bones of my father, a foolish and hopeless muggle. Much like your mother, but they both served their purposes, didn't they? Your mother died to protect you, and I killed my father. See how useful he was, even in death." Harry could see Voldemort was extremely excited, pacing back and forth. "See that house on the hillside, Potter? That's where my father lived. My mother, a witch, lived in this village and fell in love with him, but when she revealed her true self, he abandoned her. Her father despised magic." Harry was somewhat drawn into Voldemort's tale, but when Barty Crouch Jr. returned, dragging Ron and Hermione and roughly throwing them to the ground, Harry's green eyes filled with rage. Bloodshot and desperate, he tore at the ropes binding him, his heart aching as if pierced by a knife. "He left her and returned to his muggle parents before I was born, Potter. My mother died giving birth to me, and I grew up in a muggle orphanage. But I vowed to find him and exact my revenge on the man who gave me his name, Tom Riddle." After Barty left, Voldemort continued, his red eyes darting between the graves. But Harry could no longer listen. Tears streamed down his face, and he struggled to breathe. Little Barty ordered Twinkle to bring his father over. Old Barty was barely alive, clinging to his last breath. The loyal elf wept but dared not defy Barty Crouch Jr.'s orders or the Dark Lord's wrath. Karkaroff, still under Harry's petrification curse, was brought in, trembling uncontrollably. Harry had never seen anyone move under the curse, a testament to Karkaroff's terror. Harry understood his fear. Sirius had shared tales of Karkaroff's deeds. Finally, there was Gabrielle, the first to die in the cemetery that night. Gazing at the three bodies, Harry no longer feared death. He longed for it. How could he face this if he survived? After leaving Gabrielle behind, little Barty paused. He smiled, bloodied at his father lying on the ground. Atticus Blaine shot a fierce glance at Twinkle, silently commanding him to remain quiet so as not to disrupt his deep emotional state. "Listen to me," he began, his voice a soft murmur, "as I recount my family history." He paused, taking a deep breath, and continued, "There's a touch of sadness in this tale. But look, Harry, my true family has returned." As he spoke, clusters of shadows descended from the sky, casting an eerie presence over the desolate landscape. End of this chapter. Chapter 852, The Malfoy Family's Choice. Malfoy Manor was a picture of serene elegance. Servants tended to the lush green lawns, while white peacocks gracefully strutted around the fountain square. A gentle breeze rippled across the lake, adding to the tranquility of the day. The servants, who had been quietly discussing the second event of the Triwizard Tournament, fell silent as the Lord and Lady of the Manor approached. They stood respectfully in a line until the Malfoys passed by and disappeared from view. Once the coast was clear, the servants resumed their animated discussions about the champions they supported. "I don't understand, darling. Why does Fudge want us back on the school board?" Narcissa Malfoy asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. A cloud drifted over from the endless wilderness, casting a shadow over Malfoy Manor, which had been basking in bright sunshine moments before. Lucius Malfoy glanced coldly at the oddly shaped cloud, his expression unreadable. "It's clear that our dear minister is quite dissatisfied with the current situation," Lucius replied, his voice laced with irony. Narcissa, quick to catch on, nodded in understanding. "You mean the ministry is planning to exert more control over Hogwarts?" "Precisely. Fudge is obsessed with power, and Atticus Blaine's strength is a threat to him. Blaine is aware of this, but he remains unfazed," Lucius said, a fleeting, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. After the incident with the young girl champion, Blaine had Umbridge removed from her position in the transportation department with just a few words. Fudge didn't react immediately, but we all know how infuriated he was. The conflict is bound to escalate. "But it's not in our best interest to get involved in their power struggle, is it, my dear?" Narcissa asked calmly. Lucius paused, contemplating his wife's question. He gazed at the ancient grand manor, a hint of sadness in his eyes. It was time to make a decision once again. Lucius didn't believe that Blaine would fail. Unlike Dumbledore's more restrained approach, Blaine would never relinquish his greatest asset, his extraordinary magical prowess. If he found himself at a disadvantage, Blaine might resort to assassinating Cornelius Fudge, doing so without leaving any trace. Long-term observation had shown Lucius that Dumbledore's influence over Blaine was not as significant as it seemed. Therefore, it was likely that Blaine would ultimately resolve the issue through force. After all, fame and power were secondary to absolute strength. However, Lucius also believed that Blaine would only resort to such measures if absolutely necessary. Before that, a fierce storm was already brewing. The Malfoy family's business interests spanned the European wizarding world, heavily reliant on the ministry's support. If Fudge's ministry perceived them as unsupportive, their business would undoubtedly face turmoil. Lucius pondered how to navigate this situation to benefit both sides, a dilemma that had occupied his thoughts for days. Narcissa watched her husband, his brow furrowed in deep thought, with a soft gaze. She was about to offer words of comfort when she noticed his face suddenly turn pale, his familiar gray eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong, darling?" Narcissa asked, rushing to support her swaying husband, her voice filled with concern. Lucius did not respond, his eyes fixed on the arm Narcissa held. "Impossible," he muttered, his voice barely audible. In that moment of confusion, Narcissa understood. Her cheeks drained of color, and she staggered back a few steps, shaking her head in disbelief. In disbelief, Narcissa stood frozen for a few seconds before rushing forward again. She pulled Lucius away, revealing his bare arms to the air. The bright tattoo on his skin was a vivid red, and the snake in the skull's mouth seemed to writhe slightly. Lucius's eyes were bloodshot. In the more than 10 years since the Dark Lord's fall, the Dark Mark had never been so active, even in recent years. It had occasionally burned for months, but now it was different. Suddenly, a gust of wind from the lake carried a fishy scent, and dark clouds drifted in from the wilderness. The rows of meticulously pruned trees in the manor bowed under the pressure. The once peaceful Malfoy Manor was now in turmoil. This was no illusion. The heat emanating from his arm grew more intense, shattering any hope Lucius had clung to. The Dark Lord was returning. What should he do? This question had plagued Lucius for some time. He had always known this day would come, but he hadn't expected it to arrive so abruptly. Should he flee or once again follow the Dark Lord, knowing now that the ideology he once believed in was nothing but a fantasy? No, escape was not an option. The Dark Lord and his fanatical followers would hunt the Malfoy family to the ends of the earth, sparing not even Draco. But to obey? That would be a grave mistake. In his attempt to trouble Dumbledore, he had lost and damaged the treasure the Dark Lord had entrusted to him. The Dark Lord was not known for his forgiveness. Even without Atticus Blaine's warning, Lucius knew that even if the Malfoy family pledged their loyalty again, the Dark Lord might not accept it. He would likely punish Lucius in the cruelest way possible, not by killing him, but by destroying him through despair, targeting Draco. "He is going to summon me," Lucius muttered, drenched in sweat as if he were gravely ill. His eyes were filled with fear, and he ignored his wife's calls. The Dark Lord was unreliable, Lucius knew this well, but if he wanted to protect Draco and Narcissa, he had no choice but to accept the olive branch offered by Blaine, despite the cost. "He's going to summon me," Lucius repeated, gasping. "I need to write a letter to Blaine. It must be delivered immediately." "What?" Narcissa asked, incredulous. She couldn't understand why her husband wanted to write to Blaine at such a time. "No time to explain." Lucius rolled down his sleeves, grabbed his wife's wrist, and ran towards the house, ignoring the servants who rushed over, alarmed by his panic and disheveled appearance. Kicking open the study door, Lucius rushed to his desk, his breath ragged. With trembling hands, he took out parchment and a quill. As he began to write, his hand paused momentarily before the pen touched the paper. "The Dark Lord has returned, and the Malfoy family is willing to follow you and be your eyes and ears." A simple sentence, followed by Lucius Malfoy's personal magical seal. Narcissa's voice trembled, her eyes wide with disbelief. This is going to be." "This is what Blaine wanted," Lucius replied, his face pale but his eyes resolute. He quickly sealed the letter with magic and handed it to Narcissa. "Use the Flu Network to go to Hogsmeade. Find a villager, give them gold, and ask them to deliver the letter to Hogwarts. Blaine will understand." Narcissa understood the gravity of the letter. She stared at it blankly until her husband's urgent voice pulled her from her thoughts. Lucius rolled up his sleeves, revealing the Dark Mark, now black. With a wave of his wand, a black hooded cloak flew from a hidden compartment and landed in his hand. "No, don't go!" Narcissa pleaded, watching him with desperation. Helplessly, she watched as her husband hastily donned his cloak. After casting a long, contemplative glance at her, he strode out of the study. As she regained her composure, she quickly moved forward to grasp his arm. "About this matter," she began, her voice tinged with concern. Lucius turned to face his devoted wife, offering a faint, weary smile. "The Malfoys have no choice," he replied. End of this chapter. Chapter 853, The Truth. The air was suddenly filled with the rustling of cloaks, and every moment, wizards would apparate into the graveyard. They appeared behind every tombstone and cedar tree, their faces obscured by hoods. Slowly and cautiously, they approached Voldemort, as if they couldn't believe their eyes. Among them was Malfoy, who staggered when he saw Harry Potter tied to a tombstone. He couldn't fathom how the Dark Lord had managed to capture Potter, despite the dual protection of Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine. Malfoy then noticed the young man standing next to the Dark Lord, glaring at them with blazing eyes, speechless. One by one, the Death Eaters knelt, crawling to Voldemort's feet and kissing the hem of his black robe. Malfoy followed suit, filled with bitterness. He finally faced his own heart. He didn't want to see the Dark Lord return, but it was an undeniable reality. An unknown little girl, the youngest son of the Weasley family, a Muggle-born who had survived an attack thanks to Blaine's efforts, old Barty, a well-known and powerful official, and Igor Karkaroff, the traitor, were all part of this twisted gathering. Malfoy knew Karkaroff's survival was temporary and understood why the Dark Lord kept him around. Death had taken root and would soon flourish. "Master," Malfoy whispered, like the others, kissing the Dark Lord's robes with great reverence, though his dignity wept. "Welcome, Death Eaters," Voldemort said calmly. 13 years have passed since our last meeting, yet you responded to my call as if it were yesterday. We are still united under the Dark Mark, are we not? He raised his ferocious face, his slit-like nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. "I sense guilt," he said. "There is a stench of guilt in the air." Voldemort addressed his supporters, a group of fearless individuals who dared not show their faces. He mentioned names: Avery, McNeil, Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, Nott, the fathers of the most notorious students in Slytherin House. But Harry no longer cared about that. He just wanted to die heroically, without surrendering at the end of his life. He wanted to fall while charging forward, preserving the honor of his parents and sparing Sirius, Remus, Professor Blaine, and Professor Dumbledore from humiliation. He wanted to give Hermione and Ron an explanation. They had died because of him. If the Dark Lord had decided to deal with all his followers then and there, it wouldn't have been surprising. But perhaps the restoration of his power made him feel generous. Malfoy could see it. The Dark Lord had no intention of killing. This made him feel emboldened, and he mustered a bit of courage. He wanted to gather some valuable information, a bargaining chip in front of Blaine. The return of the Dark Lord couldn't be hidden from anyone, but Malfoy was eager to know how he had gathered these people here. Today was the second task of the Triwizard Tournament. The Dark Lord had managed to bring Harry Potter and the other contestants out of Hogwarts, right under the noses of Dumbledore and Blaine. It was an incredible feat. So, when Voldemort drew everyone's attention to the boy with a hint of teasing, Malfoy stood up, trembling. "Master, we are eager to know. Please tell us how you accomplished this miracle and returned to us." "Ah, that's a long story, Lucius," the Dark Lord replied, not angered by Malfoy's curiosity. In fact, he seemed a little pleased and proud, like a successful person recalling the difficult and bumpy road to triumph. He had overcome many obstacles to stand at the top. "Of course you have. I heard that this boy is my nemesis. On that fateful night, he destroyed me and my magic. But what you don't know is that all of this stems from the boy's mother. I would call it noble." Voldemort chuckled softly. "That noble woman died to save her son. Her sacrifice invoked an ancient magic that granted the boy a unique protection. I cannot touch him. I knew of the magic, but I foolishly overlooked it, and I was punished. Those dark times are behind me now. I have overcome the 4T obstacle." Malfoy watched as the Dark Lord placed a finger on Harry Potter's forehead. The boy's face contorted in pain, his eyes bulging. Voldemort chuckled again, withdrawing his finger. Malfoy listened intently to Voldemort's tale. When Voldemort recounted how the curse he cast on Harry rebounded and struck him instead, Malfoy's heart trembled with fear. He realized that the notebook he had destroyed might have been crucial. If the Dark Lord discovered that his method of ensuring immortality had failed, the Malfoy family would not be spared. Desperate thoughts swirled in his mind as he heard Voldemort begin to speak about the part he most wanted to know. "Now, see how fate favors Voldemort," Voldemort said with a touch of emotion. "Just when I was about to lose hope, a woman found me. She was not one of our allies. She was unknown before, but now you all know her name." Harry stopped struggling, recognizing who Voldemort was referring to. In his dreams, he had seen her and Voldemort murder an old Muggle together. Vitia Cleona. At the mention of her name, the Death Eaters gathered in the circle stirred. More than one realized who the monstrous figure at the end of last year's Quidditch World Cup final was. This lady, with her defiant nature, had no prior connection to me, yet she shared our plight. She and her people have endured unjust oppression from Muggles and those who claim righteousness. For centuries, they have borne the humiliation and bravely resisted. Vicia Cleona, following her ancestors' inspiration, found her way to the forest where I resided. She presented me with a treasure lost to history, and we forged a pact under its witness. She aided me in regaining my body, and I vowed to help them exact revenge on those who wronged them. With her assistance, everything proceeded much more smoothly. Lady Cleona rescued me from my ghost-like state by providing a potion unlike any wizard's brew. She also brought me Bertha Jorkins, a witch from the Ministry of Magic. Bertha was in trouble, and Miss Cleona helped her escape. Thanks to Jorkins, I learned about the upcoming Triwizard Tournament at Hogwarts and discovered a loyal Death Eater. Once I contacted him, he was eager to assist me. Yes, that's right, it was Barty. Barty Crouch Jr. puffed out his chest, basking in the honor. Of course, you've heard that Barty was captured and died in Azkaban, but the truth is more complex. He survived with the help of his renowned father. Voldemort chuckled softly, while Barty Jr. looked at his father, lying on the ground, with disdain. Voldemort continued, detailing his plans and the duel on the night of the Quidditch final last year. That duel prompted him to alter his strategy. Initially, he intended to make Harry Potter a champion, using a portkey instead of the Triwizard Trophy to transport Harry out of Hogwarts. However, that duel would make Dumbledore wary and more protective of Harry. In such a case, if Harry were still pushed to become a champion, then Dumbledore would understand immediately. Cleona had recommended Hermione because she witnessed Hermione's unwavering determination to protect Harry in the box. This indicated that there was something significant at stake. Harry appeared utterly despondent as the truth finally came to light. As expected, it was all because of him. Hermione had become a warrior due to his influence, and countless others had perished as a result of his actions. End of this chapter. Chapter 854. Karkaroff returns to nature. As Malfoy listened to the unfolding events, his fear deepened. The Dark Lord's path to resurgence was fraught with challenges, yet it seemed as though fate favored him. Vicia Cleona, a formidable dark witch capable of rivaling Atticus Blaine, had arrived due to some inexplicable ancestral guidance, pulling Voldemort from the depths of despair. It was no surprise that Bertha Jorkins knew the secrets of the Triwizard Tournament, but her knowledge of Barty Crouch Jr.'s survival was a shocking coincidence that brought her to Voldemort's attention. During the Quidditch World Cup final, Cleona's reckless actions nearly jeopardized everything, yet they managed to escape from Blaine's grasp. What troubled Malfoy most was Cleona's presence at Hogwarts, unnoticed by Dumbledore and Blaine, who had previously dealt with her. How could such a powerful witch become Voldemort's ally without their knowledge? After Voldemort finished speaking, the Death Eaters surrounding him bowed even lower, a gesture that pleased him greatly. With cruel pride gleaming in his red eyes, he turned his attention to Harry. Harry braced himself for the inevitable torture, but Voldemort, in a sudden change of heart, decided to prolong their encounter, which was a form of torment in itself. Ah, such a difficult choice, Voldemort mused, glancing at old Barty Crouch, Winky, and the pale-faced Karkaroff. Miss Cleona must know that I want my first family gathering after my return to be lively. She is quite the considerate woman. I shouldn't be too harsh on her, should I? Though I don't appreciate her temperament, it presents a dilemma. I had planned the event myself, but I mustn't overlook her kindness. With a graceful flick of his wand, Voldemort released Karkaroff from Harry's petrification spell. The moment he regained movement, Karkaroff leapt forward, throwing himself at Voldemort's feet with exaggerated desperation, tears streaming down his face. "Master!" Karkaroff cried out. "My master!" The Death Eaters stirred with recognition. They knew who Karkaroff was and what he had done. Some laughed heartily, others muttered curses under their breath, and a few sneered with disdain. The fiercest among them, Barty, even attempted to lunge at Karkaroff, but Voldemort's raised hand halted him. The commotion ceased, leaving only Karkaroff's pitiful cries. "Oh, Karkaroff, my old friend," Voldemort said, bending slightly and sniffing the air with feigned surprise. "What troubles you?" "Forgive me, master," Karkaroff sobbed, his breath ragged and desperate. "For the sake of my past contributions." "Ah, your contributions." Voldemort's lipless mouth curled into a mocking smile. "Where should we begin with that?" "I brought Harry Potter to you, Master," Karkaroff shouted, seizing his only chance for survival. "It was me. They intended for Ron Weasley to enter the competition, but I suggested Harry Potter. Let them all participate. For that reason, my lord, let me serve you again. I am willing to go through fire and water for you." "You mean to say," Voldemort's voice turned icy, his gaze empty and cold, "that Voldemort's plan faltered, and you saved me from my mistake. Is that it, Karkaroff?" Laughter erupted around them, cutting off Karkaroff's pleas. His heart seethed with hatred, not for the Dark Lord, but for Atticus Blaine. It was Blaine's manipulation that had ensnared him in the Dark Lord's scheme. After Voldemort's resurrection, even if the Death Eaters wouldn't spare him, he had hoped to buy himself some time. Atticus Blaine had always been cautious, anticipating the need for a quick escape. He had even prepared a secret hiding place, but something felt off. Karkaroff suddenly realized that this might not be a mere coincidence. Initially, there seemed to be no risk in becoming Victor's most important person and entering the lake. Blaine couldn't use this as a means of retaliation for making things more difficult for the Hogwarts champions, unless he was already aware of Voldemort's plan. But even that seemed wrong. If Blaine knew, why would he agree to let these young wizards walk into danger? Karkaroff sensed a deeper conspiracy, but dared not voice it. He had only hinted at adding something to the Dark Lord's plan, which had already sparked Voldemort's anger. If he suggested that the Dark Lord's plan might be flawed, that it had been under scrutiny by others, how would the enraged Dark Lord react? "I played only a minor role, Master. For this reason," Karkaroff pleaded. Voldemort's red eyes flickered with indifference. As he casually raised his wand, he noticed Barty Crouch Jr. glaring at Karkaroff with hatred. Karkaroff's betrayal had led to Barty Jr.'s imprisonment, confined at home by his father for over a decade. "The Dark Lord is magnanimous, Karkaroff. He can forgive your fear of death," Voldemort said with a cold smile. His words not only filled Karkaroff with ecstasy, but also surprised the surrounding Death Eaters. "But it's not just me you betrayed. You must also answer to the Death Eaters." Karkaroff was momentarily stunned, feeling as if he were mourning his own demise. "Come then, my Death Eaters!" Voldemort's voice rose, addressing his followers with open arms. "It will be you who decide whether he lives or dies." No one believed that Voldemort intended to spare Igor Karkaroff, not even the slow-witted old crab and old Goyle. "Let me, Master!" Barty Jr. cried out eagerly. "Let me go first!" Voldemort stepped aside gracefully, and Nagini, who had been lurking on the periphery, slithered forward, hissing. Harry could understand the serpent's voice as Voldemort gently caressed her. "No problem, dear Nagini. You can have him, though he may not be easy to consume later." "Despicable, despicable traitor!" Barty Jr. roared with ferocity. "Betray the Master, and see, your retribution has come." Karkaroff fell to the ground, his legs trembling with fear, muttering pleas for mercy. But there was nowhere to run, no forgiveness to be found. The overwhelming terror clouded Karkaroff's judgment, making him forget any chance to test his suspicions about the Dark Lord's plan. "Just watch!" Barty Jr. screamed, as if possessed. "Crucio!" The cemetery, shrouded in a pitch-black sky, echoed with the ghostly wails of agony. Harry watched Karkaroff, whose face twisted into a ghastly visage. In a daze, he recalled the spider writhing under the Cruciatus curse in class. Despite agreeing with Barty Crouch Jr.'s assessment of Karkaroff, Harry couldn't bear to watch any longer. Karkaroff's throat seemed constricted, unable to produce a sound. His yellow eyes became bloodshot, and his pale face flushed as red as blood. His body convulsed violently, but under the Cruciatus curse wielded by Barty Crouch Jr. with unmatched malice, he became rigid, as if petrified. Voldemort laughed cruelly, finding amusement in the scene. He glanced at his Death Eaters, first at the shrewd Lucius Malfoy. Lucius immediately grasped the Dark Lord's intent, and, beneath the hood, his face was as pale as death. "Forgive me, traitor. I'll carve out your bones." Lucius bellowed, his voice filled with fury. One by one, the Death Eaters rose, their voices of judgment reverberating across the land. Heartbreaking and bone-cutting. Not joined the tribunal. His wand aimed directly at Karkaroff. Suddenly, a deafening explosion shattered the silence of the cemetery, followed by the startled cries of several Death Eaters. Harry felt something wet and sticky strike his cheek, the metallic scent of blood overwhelming his senses and turning his stomach. He turned to look at the spot where the Death Eaters had been tormenting Karkaroff, only to find that Karkaroff was no more. His body had been blown to pieces. End of this chapter. Chapter 855, Destroy Your Heart. The pungent smell of blood overwhelmed Nagini, and without waiting for Voldemort's command, it darted forward like a bolt of lightning. It scaled a spruce tree 30 feet away, where Karkaroff's lifeless body hung. With a gaping maw filled with razor-sharp fangs, Nagini devoured half of the corpse in one swift motion. The gruesome spectacle was too much even for the hardened Death Eaters, who recoiled in horror, fearing they might become the serpent's next meal. Voldemort, however, found the scene amusing. He chuckled, his slit-like nostrils flaring slightly. "Oh, my dear Nagini, you must be famished. Don't worry, there will be something even more delectable soon," he said, his voice dripping with malice. His piercing red eyes settled on the lifeless form of old Barty Crouch, whose pale skin glistened in the dim light. "Let me handle this, master. I can do it alone." Little Barty eagerly volunteered, understanding Voldemort's intentions. He glared menacingly at the Death Eaters who had attacked Karkaroff, his voice a low, threatening growl. Lucius Malfoy, hidden beneath his hood, felt a cold sweat trickle down his face. Despite his fear, a pang of sorrow tugged at his heart. The Crouch and Malfoy families were both esteemed pureblood lineages. Unlike the Malfoys, the Crouches had wielded significant influence within the Ministry of Magic for generations. Yet now, the Crouch family was on the brink of destruction, torn apart by father and son. They had once followed the Dark Lord, lured by promises of restoring the glory of pure-blood wizards. "Oh, of course, Barty, this is your moment of glory, and no one will take it from you," Voldemort said with a cruel smile. "But I believe high-ranking ministry officials deserve certain privileges, such as dying in a duel. So, let's begin." Voldemort's voice rose sharply as he approached old Barty, his wand moving with a flick. Winky, who had been trying to shield her master, was cast aside, landing heavily on the ground. Old Barty was lifted from the earth, suspended in midair as Voldemort's wand emitted a stream of light. It wasn't meant to kill him. Instead, the light coursed through old Barty's body, mending his collapsed sternum, bent arms, and shattered leg bones. Even the crisscrossing blood marks on his skin healed under the wand's touch. In moments, old Barty appeared whole again. With a sudden gasp, old Barty's eyes snapped open. Though he had been unconscious, his mind had remained aware, absorbing every detail of the events around him. "The evil offspring I brought into this world," he cried, his voice trembling with anguish. He ignored the Dark Lord, focusing instead on the creature before him, the son who now sought to destroy him. His heart felt as if it were being torn apart. "The greatest mistake of my life." "Father," little Barty sneered, his smile twisted with malice. "My disappointing father, wasn't it you who freed me from Azkaban?" Old Barty's jaw clenched so tightly that blood seeped from his lips, yet he could find no words to respond. "Ah, old Barty," Voldemort addressed his Death Eaters, his tone mocking as if presenting a curious exhibit. A formidable ministry official, renowned for his unyielding stance against evil and his bravery in the face of darkness. Yet, here he is, the man who secretly released Voldemort's Death Eaters and kept his own son imprisoned at home for 13 years. "I must express my gratitude to you, old Barty, for your hypocrisy. You provided powerful support on the road to Voldemort's resurrection. Help." Many Death Eaters laughed, casting playful glances at Barty Crouch Sr. The embarrassment Voldemort anticipated did not manifest on Barty Sr.'s face. Harry observed Barty Sr. as if he were an outsider. Due to his treatment of Winky, Harry, like Hermione, harbored a dislike for Barty Sr. Yet now he felt a twinge of sympathy for him, having fathered such a monster, and even a hint of admiration for his refusal to plead for mercy as Karkaroff had. Facing the most malevolent dark wizard in history, whose name had become a taboo in the magical world, Barty Sr. glared fiercely at Voldemort. "It won't be like last time, Voldemort," he declared. "How dare you call the master by his first name, you?" Barty Crouch Jr. immediately sprang up, raising his wand to judge his father. "Wait," Voldemort interjected coldly. "It won't be like last time. What do you mean?" "Dumbledore will stop you," Barty Sr. retorted. "Oh, Dumbledore, you're counting on that old fool?" Voldemort sneered. I took Harry Potter right under his nose. Oh, I can't wait to see his face when he finds Harry Potter's body. And, Voldemort glanced at the 3 corpses on the ground, with these students, I'm afraid he will lose his position as headmaster of Hogwarts. But Barty Sr. seemed deaf to Voldemort's taunts. He gritted his teeth and spoke with determination. And Blaine, there is absolutely no way you can fight against Dumbledore and Blaine at the same time. Some Death Eaters shifted uneasily, seemingly agreeing with Barty Crouch's words. Voldemort laughed in amusement. Atticus Blaine, I see. So, you harbor this absurd notion that the most powerful dark wizard in history can't contend with an old fool and a young boy. It's truly amusing. Perhaps the Quidditch duel on the night of the final gave you some misconceptions, but wait and see. I will soon prove that such thinking is sheer ignorance, and Voldemort's power is unmatched. Now, Voldemort turned his fierce gaze to his Death Eaters. Remove your cloaks and let our impartial judge take a look. No Death Eater dared defy Voldemort's command. Reluctantly, they revealed their faces. Harry widened his eyes, committing their features to memory. He would await these people in hell. Almost every one of them was a significant figure in the British magical world, capable of causing upheaval with their actions. Yet here they were, kneeling behind Voldemort, complicit in his tyranny. Look at them, Voldemort exclaimed, though he claimed not to worry about Dumbledore and Blaine joining forces. He seemed agitated. He grabbed Malfoy by the collar, pulling him forward. Look at these people, Barty Crouch, Voldemort sneered. Barty Crouch, who prides himself on righteousness. I bet you've attended cocktail parties with Voldemort's subordinates. How many have you tried? This was a profound insult to Barty Sr. His nails dug into his palms as he glared with anger and hatred at these thugs who masked themselves with wealth and power. He should send them to hell. However, he understood what Voldemort was trying to do. He had to admit to himself. He was not a noble man like Albus Dumbledore. Barty Crouch Sr. was finally stung by the truth. He could endure physical torture, but the torment in his heart was unbearable. He was not the husband, father, or official he aspired to be. He had never bothered to refute people's judgments of him, but at this moment, Barty Crouch Sr. faced his own heart and had to admit that he was merely an unprincipled Ministry of Magic official, intoxicated by power. Come, my dear Barty, Voldemort taunted, seeing the regret etched on Barty Sr.'s face. With a mix of regret and remorse etched into old Barty's weathered face, Voldemort's smile widened with pride. He turned to his most devoted follower and said, Return the wand to your father. Then, like I did, cleanse the shame from yourself with your own hands. You will become Voldemort's most trusted Death Eater. End of this chapter. Chapter 856, Father and Son. Perhaps at this moment, Harry finally understood why Voldemort was deemed the most malevolent wizard in history, and why people feared him so much that they dared not even utter his name. Voldemort could have easily ended Barty Crouch Sr.'s life, but he chose not to. Instead, he sought to torment his mind, crush his dignity, and ultimately use a method far crueler than the killing curse to take his life. This was to demonstrate to his followers that the renowned Barty Crouch Sr. was nothing more than prey he could hunt at will, and that any wizard who dared to defy him would meet a dreadful fate. The impact of this was indeed profound. The fear, almost etched into their souls, surged within many Death Eaters, including Lucius Malfoy. Yet, there were also those among them whose excitement and admiration were beyond words. Come, my dear father, Barty Crouch Jr. exclaimed, drawing his wand from his pocket and striking old Barty, who had been subdued by Voldemort. The wand clattered to the ground. With a cruel and eager smile, he licked the corners of his mouth. Come on, let's fight. This is the first time, and of course, it will be the last. You know you will die, right? But your death will allow me to reclaim my sacrifice. I will finally rid myself of the shame your blood has cast upon me. The Death Eaters roared and cleared a large space, wary of Barty Crouch Jr.'s madness and the potential danger of his magic. Harry watched the father and son, and even his numbed heart felt a profound sadness. He had always longed for his family to be reunited. His parents were not heroes, and he was not the boy who lived. He wished for a simple, ordinary wizarding family like Ron's. While his classmates at Hogwarts marveled at Neville's transformation, only Harry knew how much he envied Neville for for finding his parents again. But here, before him, a father and son were pitted against each other, driven by Voldemort to a deadly confrontation. Old Barty's expression was peculiar. Upon awakening, he hadn't even glanced at the Dark Lord, but had instead berated his son with near hatred. Yet now, as they prepared for a showdown, old Barty fell silent. He glanced at the wand on the ground, his blood-stained hair obscuring the deep-seated pain in his eyes. "Oh God?" Voldemort taunted. "Can't you do it, Mr. Crouch?" Amid the mocking laughter of the Death Eaters and his son's humiliating jeers, old Barty tremulously picked up his wand. Barty Crouch Sr. was at the end of his tether. Harry knew this battle was a foregone conclusion. Barty Crouch Sr. was indeed a formidable wizard, not necessarily inferior to his son, but tragically, he wasn't truly facing his son. The first time Harry met Barty Crouch was on the night of the Quidditch final last year. Cold-blooded, hateful, and strong were the first impressions he left on Harry, Hermione, and Ron. At that time, Barty Crouch was indeed imposing, and his decisions were unchallenged by all Ministry of Magic officials, including Mr. Weasley. But now? Harry looked at old Barty Crouch. The once dignified, high-ranking Ministry official was now just an old man in his twilight years, his spirit broken. Perhaps even Filch, who only dared to shout at students, seemed to have more backbone than him. His heart had long since died. "No!" Barty Jr. had already raised his wand with a grin, but at that moment a black shadow darted in from the side, shielding old Barty Crouch. It was Winky, who had been cast aside by Voldemort earlier. "No, Master Barty. I can't do this." The house elf's frail body shielded its elderly master. Its large eyes, reminiscent of tennis balls, brimming with tears. Its voice was high-pitched and desperate. "You cannot kill your father, Master Barty. He saved you. He brought you back from Azkaban." "Oh, what a touching scene," Voldemort remarked, turning to his Death Eaters with a mocking tone. They laughed in agreement. "A loyal little elf willing to protect its master at the risk of death," Voldemort continued, his voice turning icy. "Step aside, Winky." Perhaps it was Harry's imagination, but he thought he detected a hint of panic in Barty Crouch Jr.'s voice for the first time that night. "Move away from that man immediately, Winky," Barty Jr. shouted, "if you still want to live." "You can't, Master." In addition to Dobby, Harry noticed another elf defying its master's orders. The small figure was tragically brave. "Oh, what a shame, my dear Barty," Voldemort said, shaking his head, his scarlet eyes cold. "I do have a fondness for your elf. It has made Lord Voldemort's life quite comfortable these days, so it deserves the honor of attending my resurrection ceremony. But if it insists on interfering, I'm afraid you'll have to bid it farewell." Despicable coward. The panic in Barty Jr.'s voice grew stronger. He glared at his father with hatred. "Relying on Winky to protect you." "Go away, Winky," old Barty said wearily. "You can't stop anything." No, Winky seemed to have broken through some invisible barrier, defying even old Barty's orders. It looked at its old master with tearful eyes and clung tightly to his legs. Old Barty gazed at Winky with a sorrowful expression. Perhaps at that moment, he finally saw Winky as family, rather than a mere house elf to be discarded at will. Old Barty bent down, grasped Winky's arm, and pulled it up. It was hard to imagine he still had the strength to pry away Winky's slender arms. He looked into Winky's eyes. "I hope you survive, Winky." "No, Mr. Crouch," Winky sobbed, crying hard. "Winky wants—" In a shocking turn, Barty Sr., who had been cold all his life, suddenly smiled at Winky. Under the astonished gazes of everyone, including Barty Crouch Jr., he embraced Winky and touched its large ears. He whispered something, and as Winky froze in surprise, he hurled it away. Winky rolled across the ground, colliding with the cauldron where the potion had been boiling. This scene left Barty Crouch Jr. stunned. Before he could react, his father suddenly shouted and raised his wand. Despicable coward, Barty Jr. cursed inwardly, thinking his father was planning a surprise attack. He prepared to dodge and raised his wand, but a bright silver curse light pierced the darkness, exploding in midair with a dazzling flash. Boom! Old Barty collapsed to the ground, his throat pierced by his own magic. Blood gushed from the wound in his neck like a spring, his body convulsing and curling up like a catfish on a chopping board. His sad eyes lingered on his son in a long silence. "Why?" Barty Crouch Jr. roared in madness. He rushed to his father, looking at the man who had brought him endless pain and shame. "Why did you do this? Get up!" Barty Jr.'s voice trembled. "Get up and fight me, you coward! How dare you! Cut out your heart and gouge out your bones!" The Cruciatus curse fell on old Barty, but it no longer had any effect. Old Barty's pain did not intensify. He looked at the son who had once made him immensely proud and offered a gentle smile as his blood flowed. Before succumbing, he whispered, "You can't kill your own father, Barty." End of chapter. Chapter 857, Failed Rescue. Barty Crouch Sr. was dead. Once a prominent figure, he had served as the director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the Department of International Magical Cooperation at the Ministry of Magic. He had even been a contender for the position of Minister of Magic. Now he lay lifeless on the cold, damp ground. The wound on his neck had ceased to bleed, and his blood had dried. A flicker of light lingered in his eyes, a mix of guilt and regret, but it soon faded. His half-ruined life had vanished from this world. Even Voldemort's Death Eaters couldn't help but feel a twinge of emotion at the passing of such a man. They stood around, observing the still form of Barty Crouch, their silence a brief moment of respect. Suddenly, with a thud, Barty Crouch Jr. collapsed to the ground. The madness in his eyes subsided, but the hatred remained, growing even more intense. "Despicable man," he gasped. "How dare you die like this? You don't deserve such an easy death. For 13 years you were the tyrant." Yet, in an instant, his crazed energy returned, and he spat out, "How cruel! He only deserves this end." "Eat him!" Barty Crouch Jr. suddenly rose and crawled towards Voldemort, fear evident in his eyes as he realized his mistake. "Master," he pleaded. "Nagini." Harry, overwhelmed with emotion, felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He heard a stifled sob. It was Winky. The house elf covered its ears, its frail body tense. It dared not listen or look at the scene unfolding, though it knew all too well what was happening. Barty Jr. kowtowed, begging for mercy. Nagini, Voldemort's snake, slithered forward, coiling around Barty Sr.'s head, neck, and upper body. The sickening crunch of ribs breaking filled the air. Voldemort, having vented his anger, ceased his torment of his loyal followers. He gazed indifferently at Barty Jr., whose face was pressed into the dirt. He seemed oblivious to the fact that this Death Eater had endured 13 years of imprisonment for him, cared for him meticulously, and even sacrificed an arm for his resurrection. "I set the stage for you and invited the audience, yet how did you repay my poor performance?" Voldemort's voice was sharp. Nagini, poised to strike, slithered around the Crouches and halted before Barty Jr. Harry was certain of the path the snake would take. Its vertical pupils gleamed with cruelty and malice. Harry knew how much Winky adored its master. In the school kitchen, it couldn't bear to hear a bad word about Barty Crouch Sr., even after being dismissed by him. Now, with Barty Sr. having taken his own life before it, and the young master showing no remorse, only regret for not having killed his father himself, Winky was powerless. It was clear what Nagini intended to do. A flicker of hesitation crossed Barty Jr. His pale face, causing Nagini's slit-like pupils to contract, revealing a dangerous glint. "Crucio!" Voldemort cast the curse without hesitation, and Barty Crouch Jr. screamed, writhing at Voldemort's feet. Harry didn't understand, but he felt no sympathy for him. Instead, he felt a strange satisfaction, believing that allowing such people to exist was the greatest insult to humanity. It wasn't worth it. Harry felt a sense of futility for the old man. Atticus Blaine felt a deep sense of worthlessness for Winky. As he looked at her, he was surprised to see tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so disappointed, Atticus." In that brief exchange of glances, Atticus understood Winky's intentions. She was planning to save him, to rescue him from the clutches of the Dark Lord. A warmth spread through his otherwise cold heart, but after a moment's hesitation, Atticus glared at Winky. "I can't bear to live, Winky," he thought, "who had died here tonight because of him." Atticus knew he had to forgive himself for this. However, his glare did not deter Winky. She crawled on the ground, her face a mask of sadness and fear, cautiously making her way toward Atticus. This was the last task given to her by her old master Barty, and she was determined to complete it. There was only one chance. If the Dark Lord saw through her intentions, success would be impossible. She had to save Atticus Blaine. For the sake of her old master and the magical world, only the boy who lived could defeat the Dark Lord. He was the Dark Lord's nemesis. No one could have imagined that at the darkest moment, when the most dangerous dark wizard in history returned to the magical world, the one trying to save the future of wizards would be a humble house elf. Atticus's green eyes pleaded with Winky. He didn't want her to come closer. He didn't want her to save him. Too many had died because of him tonight. He couldn't bear to risk another innocent life. Meanwhile, Barty Crouch Jr. slowly rose from the ground. Voldemort had decided to spare him. Though he had returned with ambitions to conquer everything, including death, his power was still weak. Loyal followers like Barty Jr. were valuable and could serve as role models. The highlight of the night was about to begin. Voldemort turned slowly toward Atticus Blaine, but at that moment, boom, an unexpected roar and vibration shocked everyone in the cemetery. Even Winky paused, looking instinctively toward the source of the sound. In the gloomy world, a green torrent erupted from the ground, shattering the dark clouds and allowing thin sunlight to touch the earth. The vibrant breath of life diluted the deathly aura that filled the cemetery. In the bright, pleasant light, a gray altar rose from the ground and hovered in midair. Voldemort's red vertical pupils narrowed to slits, his skull-like face contorted with anger, and his nostrils flared. The Death Eaters stared at the floating altar in astonishment, frightened by its immense power and utterly confused by the unfolding events. Another defiance of Voldemort's orders? Voldemort said coldly. Suddenly, the ancient aura from the altar washed over the area like a blue tide. The ground and trees it touched glowed with unparalleled vitality. Withered grass and scorched spruce trees sprouted new buds. The Death Eaters grew restless, inching closer to Voldemort, seeking protection from the heart-stopping altar flashing with ancient runes. Under Voldemort's intense gaze, the radiant altar emitted several green beams of light that enveloped Gabrielle, Hermione, Ron, Karkaroff, and Atticus. Silently, the magical ropes binding Atticus dissolved. Like the dead, he slowly floated from the ground, his figure gradually becoming blurred. At this moment, Voldemort's expression shifted from anger to fury. "You can't learn the lesson and plan to do. You underestimate Voldemort's power," Voldemort bellowed, raising his wand with a sudden, fierce motion. In an instant, his frail form dissolved into a swirling mass of black mist, losing all semblance of humanity. Within the churning darkness, two erratic scarlet flashes flickered ominously. With a resounding crack, the black mist expanded, and streaks of piercing thunder descended from the clouds, now darkened once more. The roiling mist surged relentlessly toward the altar. The magic of death swiftly consumed the green light, thickening the air, and forcing several figures that had begun to emerge from the void back into obscurity. A deep, guttural roar emanated from the black mist, and the crimson glow intensified. The mist, now enveloping the entire cemetery, formed a tornado that tightly coiled around the altar, which seemed desperate to escape. Relentless thunderbolts shattered the green light emanating from the altar, bombarding it without mercy. After a prolonged struggle, the altar appeared to recognize its futile efforts to break free. It ceased its resistance entirely, the green light fading from its surface. With a heavy thud, it crashed to the ground, falling silent and still. End of this chapter. Chapter 858, Confrontation with Death. The ground was in disarray, as if an iron fence had been overturned. The once withered shrubs and spruce trees, briefly revived by a mysterious blue light, were now scorched again under the onslaught of thunder and black mist. Though the air had cleared, the malevolent magic, brimming with anger, lingered ominously, ready to strike. The Death Eaters trembled, feeling the oppressive rays on their backs. They had all witnessed the terrifying wrath of the Dark Lord, and it was futile to expect him to remember old feelings at such a time. No one dared to inquire about the situation. Only the Dark Lord himself knew the secrets of the altar. In the face of Voldemort's power, any conspiracy is useless, Voldemort murmured softly. He had no intention of explaining further, merely attempting to conceal his true intentions. Finally, he turned his gaze to Harry. The final moment had arrived, and Harry felt it in his heart, exhaling a sigh of relief. Under Voldemort's watchful eyes, it was best that Winky had no chance to whisk him away. Harry slowly bent down, picked up the wand that had fallen to the ground, and stared at Voldemort with green eyes burning with hatred. "You seem prepared, don't you, Potter?" Voldemort approached slowly, smiling softly as he addressed his Death Eaters. "I think you have seen how foolish it is to believe this boy is stronger than me. Now, I want to dispel this misunderstanding. Harry Potter's escape from me was sheer luck. This is the final part of the resurrection ceremony. I will kill him to prove my power, right here and now, in front of you." Lucius Malfoy knew Harry Potter better than most. He had been inquiring about Harry's activities at school through his son. He was well aware that Harry was just a reckless boy with little sense. Yet now, he fervently hoped that Harry would display some magical prowess. With a heavy solemnity weighing on everyone's hearts, Harry's steps faltered slightly. He approached the body that Barty Crouch Jr. had moved to the tombstone, standing beside Ron and Hermione, who lay side by side on the ground. He took one last look at his two friends, their eyes devoid of life, took a deep breath, and then turned decisively to face Voldemort. "You've learned dueling, haven't you, Harry Potter?" Voldemort taunted. Harry remained still, his green eyes ablaze with defiance. He could die, but he refused to be toyed with. "I said bow." Voldemort's red eyes glowed menacingly in the darkness. There was no protection from Dumbledore or Blaine, and no mother to sacrifice for him. "Come on, Potter. I see you have the wand. Show the Death Eaters, show them. Let them see your body, so they don't wonder who is more powerful. Come on, etiquette must be observed. Dumbledore and Blaine would certainly want you to behave gracefully. Bow to death, Harry." Hearing this, Harry thought of Professor Atticus Blaine. He had learned formal dueling from this great wizard for over a year. He knew how much he had improved, confident that he could defeat 10 of his former selves before taking the course. But it was futile. If Harry Potter were to die here, could Blaine truly believe that he and the ailing Dumbledore could stand against the Dark Lord? Watching the pale-cheeked boy descend from the ruins with a wand in hand, Lucius had to admit that Harry Potter's courage was commendable. For a young boy, the calm manner in which he faced death was undeniably tragic. A bead of sweat trickled down Lucius Malfoy's temple, and his heart tightened. Voldemort leaned forward, his snake-like face fixed on Harry. "Let us bow to each other, Harry," he sneered. Professor Blaine had once resisted Professor Dumbledore's curse in his 5th year, but even he could not withstand Voldemort's power. In this era, the Death Eaters formed a large circle, encircling Voldemort and Harry, awaiting the outcome of this absurd yet solemn duel. Voldemort calmly raised his wand, and Harry felt his spine bend under the pressure. The same oppressive force that had subdued Hermione, and Ron before their deaths reappeared. He had no room for resistance, and couldn't even discern the source of the attack. Harry resolved in his heart to cast at least one spell, not just for his parents, who had sacrificed themselves to save him, but also for Ron and Hermione, who had stood by him through everything, and for Professor Atticus Blaine, who had taught him with such care. For Sirius's 12 years in prison, for Remus's years of wandering, for Hagrid, and for Dumbledore. "Very good," Voldemort said softly, raising his wand, and the pressure on Harry's back vanished. "Now we duel." Harry realized that even without considering his immense power, Voldemort was a master duelist. As soon as Voldemort's words fell, Harry caught a glimpse of his wand's afterimage. Voldemort wouldn't kill him easily. He would first torture him, watch him suffer, and prove his weakness. Predicting his opponent's intentions, Harry suddenly raised his wand. As soon as his magical barrier formed, it shattered in the roaring airwaves. The force plowed through, hurling Harry backward with an irresistible force. His back slammed hard against a tree stump. It was as if he had been hit by a speeding car and smashed into a wall. Normally, such an impact would have left him unconscious or seriously injured, but it caused no real harm, just a trace of bright red at the corner of his mouth from biting his tongue. "Oh, it seems you've learned some real skills, haven't you? This could make things a bit more entertaining for us," Voldemort remarked as the smoke cleared, revealing a disheveled Harry coughing and rising from the ground, spitting out blood. Voldemort's red eyes, clouded by the failed attack, gleamed with pleasure. "Need a break, Harry? Or do you want to try again?" Harry didn't respond. His head was spinning. This wasn't from the impact, but from Voldemort's violent disruption of his magic, causing turbulence within him. "I asked if you want to try again," Voldemort said softly. "Answer me. Out of body." Harry instinctively dodged, but his blurred vision led to a misjudgment, and his body suddenly froze. He had experienced this sensation many times in class. It was the Imperious Curse, and he had been hit by it. Fear and anger seemed to fade away, replaced by a sense of happiness that clouded his thoughts, as if he were in a dream. He knew it was a dream, but it was so wonderful that he didn't want to leave. "Say no," a dreamy voice urged him. "I won't say it," a stronger voice in the back of his mind insisted. "I won't answer. Say no. Don't say it. Don't answer. Say no." "I will not say it." The words burst from Harry's mouth, echoing over the graveyard. The dreamy state vanished abruptly, as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over him. "You won't say it?" Voldemort said softly. "You won't say no? Harry, I'm going to teach you a little more about the virtue of obedience. Perhaps a bit more pain?" Harry regained his senses and dove behind a marble tombstone just before Voldemort's wand caused an explosion. "We're not playing hide-and-seek, Harry," Voldemort smiled cruelly. "You know you can't hide from me. Does this mean you're tired of our duel? If so, I can end it, as you wish." Harry knew that Voldemort could immobilize him at any moment, and if he did, Harry wouldn't be able to counterattack. He would never perish without launching an attack. Avada Kedavra! As soon as Harry emerged from behind the tombstone, Voldemort swung his wand in a swift downward motion. A brilliant green light erupted, forming a dazzling barrier that surged rapidly toward Harry, charged with lethal intent. Before the spell could reach him, Harry stood firm, his green eyes gleaming with a fearless resolve. "Let it end," he thought. "Expelliarmus!" he shouted, as a bolt of red lightning shot forth, racing to meet the oncoming green light. End of this chapter. Chapter 859, A Bright Future. At noon, the bright sunshine finally pierced through the thick clouds, casting golden rays upon the earth. These beams illuminated Harry and Voldemort, locked in their fateful showdown. The Death Eaters initially dismissed it as mere sunlight, but they soon realized it was something far more significant. "I shouldn't have disappointed them, right?" Harry thought warily as the aurora-like green barrier met the red electric lock. Despite the dire situation, he showed no sign of pleading or weakness. Instead, he launched a courageous attack on Voldemort, proving he was no coward, unlike Peter Pettigrew. Harry awaited death with a calm, almost numb acceptance. A part of him was even glad at the prospect of reuniting with Hermione and Ron. He hoped they would wait for him and not venture too far ahead. But then, something unexpected happened. Harry's wand began to vibrate as if electrified. He gripped it tightly, unable to release it even if he wanted to. His eyes widened in surprise. The green light from Voldemort had vanished, as had the red lightning from his own wand. The connection between their wands transformed into a thin, dazzling golden beam of light. Harry's gaze followed the golden beam as it extended into the distance. He saw Voldemort's pale, slender fingers clutching a trembling wand, his almost transparent snake-like face illuminated by the golden light, filled with panic. Suddenly, without warning, Harry felt his feet lift off the ground, as did Voldemort's. The two wands remained connected by the flickering golden thread, lifting them higher until they soared above the tallest spruce in the cemetery. The Death Eaters were stunned, shouting for instructions from Voldemort. Some, like Barty Crouch Jr., acted boldly, firing a spell at Harry without waiting for permission. However, before the spell could reach Harry, the golden thread connecting him to Voldemort snapped, yet the wands remained tightly linked. The golden threads exploded into thousands of finer, arc-shaped strands, forming a net that deflected Barty's deadly curse. This bewildering scene left the Death Eaters even more confused. Lucius Malfoy watched, his pale face silently shifting with emotion. "Do not move!" Voldemort commanded the Death Eaters, his red eyes wide with shock. He was as bewildered by the unfolding events as Harry was. It defied his understanding of magic. Suddenly, celestial music filled the air, emanating from every golden thread in the vibrating network of light surrounding Harry and Voldemort. Harry recognized it, even though he had only heard it once before. It was the song of Fawkes, the Phoenix. "Don't disconnect!" The music resonated not only in Harry's ears, but also in his heart. An image of a spirited old man appeared in his mind, Professor Dumbledore, as if he were there, guiding him. Faced with this request, Harry hesitated. He knew the situation seemed to favor him, yet he had already resigned himself to death. As he wavered, his wand vibrated more violently, and the golden thread connecting him to Voldemort changed, with large beads of light sliding along it. Harry's hand trembled as the beads of light approached him, causing his wand to tremble even more. Instinctively, he tightened his grip, noticing that Voldemort seemed to relax as the pressure eased. This only fueled Harry's determination. In Atticus Blaine's heart, a fierce determination surged. He felt a burning fury within him. Regardless of the outcome of this peculiar duel, Atticus instinctively understood that he and Voldemort were evenly matched. Given this realization, he knew he had to win first, and only then could he face whatever came next with calm resolve. Atticus focused all his thoughts, channeling his energy to push the glowing orbs of light toward Voldemort. The haunting melody of the phoenix echoed in his ears, and his eyes, filled with unwavering resolve, blazed with anger. Gradually, the orbs ceased their slide toward him and began to inch toward the other end. Voldemort's wand, now trembling violently, betrayed his shock and fear. This sight fueled Atticus's determination, and he concentrated even harder on driving the orbs forward. A quivering orb of light hovered mere inches from the tip of Voldemort's wand, drawing ever closer. Atticus sensed that whatever happened when the orb reached Voldemort's wand, it would be something Voldemort dreaded. Never before had Atticus been so focused on a single task. His sole aim was to force the orb into Voldemort's wand. The orb trembled along the golden thread, and as it connected with the wand's tip, a piercing scream erupted from Voldemort's wand, echoing endlessly. Voldemort's red eyes widened in astonishment. From the wand's tip, several streams of gray mist emerged, followed by a hand made of thick smoke. It circled Voldemort's head twice before vanishing. Was it the hand Voldemort had crafted for Barty Crouch Jr.? Atticus wondered, feeling certain of this truth. More unexplained currents of air followed, and the wand emitted another shrill scream. A larger object, also made of thick smoke, emerged from the wand's tip. First, a human head appeared, then arms and a body. Atticus's green eyes widened in shock. He recognized the old man. He had seen him in a dream where Voldemort and Cleona were plotting. The old man had interrupted them and paid with his life. Now, the old man's entire form appeared, leaning on a cane, looking at the two combatants with mild surprise, observing the wand and the forbidden net connecting them. "So, he is truly a wizard?" the old man remarked, gazing at Voldemort. "This man is going to kill me. Fight him, kid." Voldemort's expression turned to horror once more. He recognized the muggle he had killed, yet he couldn't comprehend the current events. How could a dead man reappear? The strange phenomena from Voldemort's wand continued. Another head, shrouded in the same gray smoke, emerged. This time, it was a woman. The momentary confusion nearly caused Atticus to drop his wand, but he quickly steadied it, his arms trembling. It was Bertha Jorkins. Since the Ministry of Magic had confirmed her disappearance, her story had been featured in the Daily Prophet, and Atticus had seen her picture in the newspaper. The ghost of Bertha Jorkins, her eyes wide with urgency, watched the struggle. "Don't let go," she shouted, her voice echoing like the old man's, as if from a distant place. "Don't let him kill you, Atticus. Don't let go." Something was amiss, Atticus realized. Even if he didn't fully understand the magical principles at play, he could infer something significant from the scene unfolding before him. It shouldn't be like this. His entire body shook with excitement, and the hatred in his tear-filled green eyes was replaced by hope. Something crucial was missing. Atticus cried out in his heart, praying fervently. If his small victory had indeed caused Voldemort's wand to revisit the magic it had cast, then perhaps there was a chance for something greater. If the wand had truly been replaying the events, then the spirits of Ron and Hermione should have appeared before those of the old man and Bertha Jorkins. Yet, they were absent. Harry's gaze shifted to the lifeless bodies before him, and a realization struck him with undeniable clarity. There was only one possibility. Ron and Hermione were not dead at all. End of chapter. Chapter 860. Blaine. Harry's entire body trembled, not from the strain of maintaining the connection with Voldemort's wand, but from the hope sparked by his own conjecture. Never before had he wished so fervently to be right. Ron and Hermione's souls had not appeared, suggesting they were still alive. But how could this be possible? It was common knowledge that since the advent of the killing curse, only one person had survived it, Harry himself, earning him the title of the boy who lived. Voldemort had claimed immortality, attributing it to his mother's fearless sacrifice, which bestowed upon him a powerful protective magic. Hermione and Ron's parents were absent, leaving no one to shield them from the curse. If they were not dead, then what was the current state of Hermione and Ron? They lay on the ground, lifeless like Gabrielle. Doubts clouded Harry's mind. He clung desperately to the hope that his guess was correct, yet the doubts persisted. Suddenly, Harry's thoughts halted. Another head emerged from the tip of Voldemort's wand. Instantly, Harry recognized her. Her appearance was undeniable proof that Ron and Hermione were not dead. He should have anticipated her presence if his guess was accurate, but his overwhelming hope for Ron and Hermione's safety had blinded him. The ghost of a young woman with long hair descended to the ground as Bertha had, straightening up to gaze at him. Harry's arms shook violently as he stared at his mother's face. "Your dad is here too," she said softly. "He wants to see you. He will bear it fine, Harry. Bear it." Sure enough, he appeared. First his head, then his body, a tall man with disheveled hair. The man, Sirius, longed to see again. James Potter's soul rose from the tip of Voldemort's wand and landed on the ground like his wife, standing upright. He approached Harry, looking down at him, and spoke in a distant, echoing voice, low enough that Voldemort couldn't hear. Voldemort's face turned pale with fear as he saw the man he had killed walking around him. "Don't be sad," James smiled at Harry. "They are not dead. Your friends are not dead. Their souls are still in their bodies, and we can see them." In an instant, tears welled up in Harry's green eyes. He bit his lip until it bled, using the pain to hold back his tears. Never had there been such a beautiful moment, and his heart swelled with happiness and hope. "After the connection is severed, we can only stay for a short time, but we will buy you time for the house elf, who can take you away and back to Hogwarts. Do you understand, Harry?" "Understand," Harry gasped, gripping his wand tightly as it slipped in his hand. "Get out," James whispered. "Get ready to run. Get out now." "Hey!" Harry shouted, feeling he could no longer hold on. He jerked the wand forcefully, breaking the golden thread, causing the light net to vanish and the phoenix song to cease. Yet, the ghosts of those killed by Voldemort remained, encircling him to shield Harry from view. Boom! Caught off guard, Harry hit the ground hard. By all rights, a fall from such a height should have left his legs injured or fractured. But perhaps the soft soil and dead leaves of the cemetery cushioned his fall, or maybe other factors were at play. Regardless, he suffered little harm. After rolling twice, Harry sprang up and ran like a wild horse, racing towards Ron, Hermione, and Gabrielle, who lay neatly arranged. Twinkle! With a flying leap, Harry landed on Ron and Hermione, hooking his feet around Gabrielle's neck, and shouted at Winky beneath the tombstone. The elf was momentarily startled, but quickly regained its composure. With a loud pop, it vanished and reappeared beside Nagini. Before the venomous snake could react, the elf used its extraordinary magic to swallow the old man whole, extracting Barty and then apparating again to Harry's side. Its free hand reached out to grab Harry's arm. "Stop, Winky!" The most dreadful thing occurred. Barty Crouch Jr. was more vigilant than any other Death Eater. He had realized their plan and reacted swiftly. His eyes, red against his pale, crazed face, glared as he hissed, "You are not allowed to leave." Harry's heart leapt into his throat. He knew that the elf was bound to obey its master's orders. However, Winky had previously shown traits similar to Dobby, defying the commands of Crouch and his son. A flicker of struggle crossed Winky's face, and its hand hesitated in midair before continuing toward Harry. But that brief pause gave Barty Crouch Jr. the chance he needed. He whipped out his wand and issued a command. With a sharp crack, a beam of red light shot through the air, striking Winky squarely in the back. Harry watched as Winky's large, tennis ball-like eyes lost their spark and descended into chaos. Damn it! Harry's face mirrored the madness of Barty Crouch Jr. His hatred for him now surpassed even that for Voldemort. They had been so close to escaping, and this final opportunity was snatched away by Barty Crouch Jr. Knock him out! Voldemort was still haunted by the specters of Harry's parents. After the golden thread vanished, he landed hastily, still ensnared by the ghosts surrounding him. Many Death Eaters charged toward Harry, their spells raining down like a storm. Harry couldn't evade them. He had to protect Winky and the three people beneath him, relying solely on the shield charm for defense. Yet his magical barrier shattered almost instantly under the relentless assault. It was a dire situation. Harry felt despair creeping in, knowing escape was slipping away, when suddenly Barty Crouch Jr., leading the charge, appeared surprised. The Death Eaters pursuing him shared his astonishment, their eyes filled with confusion as they looked at Harry and the three people beneath him. Harry quickly realized what was happening. He was glowing. Not just him, but Ron, Hermione, and Gabrielle beneath him. No, it wasn't them emitting the light. It was the sportswear they wore. The sensation of being torn from space was overwhelming. The tracksuits were portkeys. Professor Atticus Blaine had ingeniously turned their tracksuits into portkeys. As he processed this revelation, Harry understood why Hermione and Ron had survived the killing curse. The sportswear, as explained by Professor Blaine during Moody's defense against the dark arts class on the unforgivable curses, was a clever method to resist the killing curse. No wonder Professor Blaine had insisted that the champions wear the sportswear, even for those most crucial to the tournament. His body was vanishing, as were Ron, Hermione, and Gabrielle. Harry grabbed Winky, and with old Barty's body, which Winky clung to even in unconsciousness, he pulled them into the swirling light. However, Barty Crouch Jr. was relentless. Unlike the other Death Eaters, he didn't hesitate. He lunged toward them, a twisted smile on his pale face, determined to capture Harry for his master. Harry hesitated for a moment. Barty Crouch Jr. was not struck down. Atticus Blaine knew exactly where they would return. Once there, Barty Crouch Jr. would be powerless, facing judgment instead of continuing to follow Voldemort. This would prevent him from escaping justice. Barty Crouch Jr., whose fingers were mere inches away from Harry, was forced to return to Hogwarts with them. However, allowing Barty Crouch Jr. to return to Hogwarts would not align with certain plans, as it would make it impossible for the Ministry of Magic, led by Fudge, to deny Voldemort's resurrection. At this critical moment, Gabrielle suddenly leaped into action. Under Harry's astonished gaze, her once lifeless blue eyes transformed into a commanding purple. Her cold, purple gaze fixed intently on Barty Crouch Jr., who was standing close by. Realizing the danger, Barty Crouch Jr. was terrified and attempted to flee. However, he was up against Atticus Blaine, a man renowned for creating miracles in record time and possessing unparalleled magical prowess. Barty Crouch Jr. met his end. A torrent of golden flames erupted from the ground, piercing the dark clouds above and allowing warm sunlight to bathe the earth, spelling the gloom of the cemetery. Barty Crouch Jr.'s wretched and disgraceful life was extinguished completely, leaving not even a trace of ash behind. Atticus! Voldemort emerged from the swirling smoke, roaring as he raised his wand, but it was too late. As the red and purple eyes met briefly in the void, the group from Hogwarts vanished completely into the ether. End of this chapter.